Welcome to Background Historian, the place where history is told softly, slowly, and in the background, so you can drift into sleep while journeying through the past. Each night we'll explore another story of civilizations, empires, and everyday lives. Spoken in a soothing tone, meant to calm your mind and carry you gently toward rest. Settle in, close your eyes, and let's step quietly into history together. Long before pyramids, long before hieroglyphs, long before the idea of pharaohs or dynasties, the Nile flowed steadily through the land of Egypt. It was constant. Each year, without fail, the river swelled with floodwaters from the faraway rains of Africa. The waters spread across the banks, soaking the fields, leaving behind black, fertile earth. To the people who lived here, this was no ordinary flood. It was a miracle. Picture the land. On either side of the river, golden sands stretched into the horizon. The desert was harsh, dry, and unforgiving. Nothing grew there, and travelers risked their lives stepping too far into the endless dunes. But close to the Nile, everything changed. Papyrus reeds swayed in the breeze. Birds gathered at the water's edge. Fish darted in the current. And when the floodwaters receded, the earth was so rich that barley and wheat grew tall and plentiful. It was here, around 6000 BCE, that the first small groups of people began to settle. They were not kings or priests or scribes. They were families, farmers, hunters, and gatherers, drawn to the life-giving waters. They built simple huts from reeds and mud. They made tools from flint. They planted seeds and watched as the river gave them food. Year after year, they learned the rhythm of the flood: rise, retreat, renewal. The Nile was not just their source of food. It was their teacher. From it, they learned patience, order, and trust in cycles greater than themselves. Imagine walking through one of these early villages. The air is warm, the smell of baked bread drifts from a clay oven. Children chase each other among the huts. A farmer bends low in his barley field, inspecting the green shoots. Women weave mats from reeds, their fingers moving quickly and skillfully. Fishermen pull in nets heavy with fish, laughing as they divide the catch. Life is simple, but secure. In the evenings, the people gather around small fires. They tell stories of the river. They wonder why it rises each year, why it gives so generously. They begin to see the Nile as something more than water. It must have a spirit, a will, perhaps even a god behind it. And so, the first seeds of Egyptian religion are sown, not in temples of stone, but in whispered prayers under the stars. The desert, too, plays its part. The people know that beyond their green fields lies danger, death, and silence. They learn to fear it, but also to respect it. The desert protects them from invaders, keeps them safe in their narrow world along the river. And so Egypt becomes a land of duality. Fertile green against endless gold, life against death, order against chaos. This balance, the river and the desert, becomes the foundation of Egyptian thought, a way of seeing the world that will last for thousands of years. By around 5000 BCE, the villages along the Nile had grown larger. Families worked together to dig small canals, guiding water to their crops. Surplus grain was stored in clay jars, enough to last through dry times. People began to trade with one another, exchanging grain for fish, pottery for stone tools. With trade came connection. With connection came community. And with community came the first leaders. At first, they were simply the strongest hunters, or the wisest elders. But slowly, something more formal began to take shape. Some men claimed to have the favor of the gods, to know the secrets of the floods, to speak for the unseen forces of nature. These were the first chiefs, early echoes of the pharaohs yet to come. The people followed them not out of fear, but because order was needed. The Nile was generous, but it was also demanding. Fields had to be measured after each flood. Canals had to be maintained. Disputes had to be settled. Leadership was not luxury, it was survival. As generations passed, the Nile taught more lessons. People noticed that the stars above matched the rhythm of the floods. They marked time not just by seasons, but by constellations. They learned to predict when the waters would rise, when the fields would be ready for planting. In their careful observation, the foundations of science and astronomy quietly began. They also discovered the magic of clay and fire. Pottery became more refined, decorated with simple designs. Some pots held grain, others held beer brewed from barley, a drink both nourishing and joyful. Music, too, found its place, flutes carved from reeds, drums made from animal skins, voices lifted in song at the end of long days. Life was no longer only about survival. It was about beauty, expression, and connection to the divine. Take a deep breath now. Picture the river at night, stars reflected in its waters. Hear the quiet hum of insects, the soft murmur of families gathered in the dark. Feel the slow, steady passage of time. In this gentle rhythm, civilization itself is being born. And if you're still with me, awake and listening, I'd like to invite you softly, kindly, to subscribe to Background Historian. Each night we'll walk together into another story of the past, soothing, steady, meant to carry you into rest. Subscribing helps us grow this community, and ensures there is always another calming journey waiting for you tomorrow. Now, let us return to the Nile. By 400 BCE, Egypt was divided into regions. To the north lay the delta, wide and marshy, with many branches of the river spreading toward the sea. To the south lay Upper Egypt, where the Nile flowed more narrowly between cliffs and rocky hills. Though they shared the same river, these regions developed their own traditions, their own gods, their own leaders. The people of Lower Egypt wore papyrus wreaths and worshipped cobra goddesses. The people of Upper Egypt favored lotus flowers and falcons. Each region grew proud of its ways, its symbols, its rulers. Over time, the Nile became not only a source of unity, but a boundary between competing worlds. And yet, through all their differences, the people of both lands lived by the same rhythm, the flood, the planting, the harvest. The Nile bound them together even as it divided them. We must imagine how life truly felt. A farmer wakes before dawn. The air is cool, and the first light of the sun reflects off the water. He steps barefoot into the fields, feeling the damp earth between his toes. He bends low, cutting barley with a flint blade, placing the stalks carefully into a basket. His wife tends a clay oven, the smell of baking bread filling the air. Children laugh as they chase one another through the reeds. Dogs bark, geese honk, donkeys bray. Life is full, busy, alive. At night, the same family gathers outside their hut. The stars spread endlessly above them. The father points to a cluster in the sky, telling his children how it guides the floods. The mother pours beer into a small clay cup and sets it on the ground, a gift for the unseen powers that bring life to their fields. The children listen, wide-eyed, as their grandmother tells them stories of gods that live in the river, gods that control the sky, gods that keep chaos at bay. These stories are not yet written, not yet carved into stone. But they are the first threads of a mythic tapestry that will shape Egypt for thousands of years. And so, slowly, gently, Egypt begins to take shape. Villages grow into towns. Towns grow into small kingdoms. Leaders wear crowns of reeds and shells. Local gods take animal forms, hawks, cats, crocodiles. The Nile remains the lifeblood, feeding both body and spirit. We stand here, at the threshold of history, watching as Egypt begins to rise from the sands. The people do not yet know what their descendants will build. They cannot imagine pyramids, temples, or pharaohs. But in their quiet lives, in their careful farming, in their whispered prayers, they are laying the foundations of a civilization that will endure for millennia. And now, as you lie back and let sleep draw nearer, imagine once more the Nile before time. Picture its waters glinting beneath the moon, its banks alive with reeds and songbirds. Hear the distant laughter of families gathered in small villages, the crackle of fires, the hum of ancient voices. Feel the warmth of the earth, fertile and generous, promising life year after year. This is where it begins. This is Egypt before Egypt, the cradle of a story that will unfold slowly, night after night. Thank you for listening. This has been Background Historian. Tomorrow, we will return to these lands and explore how the spirits of the river became the first gods, shaping the beliefs of a people who would live forever in the memory of history. For now, close your eyes, drift into the quiet, and let the Nile carry you into dreams. Sleep well. The people of the Nile did not separate the world into natural and supernatural. For them, everything was alive. The flood was a god. The soil was a god. The sun that rose each morning was not just a burning star but a divine presence watching over them. At first, these gods were not distant beings high in the heavens. They were close, intimate, woven into daily life. Each village had its own protective spirit, its own sacred animal, its own version of the divine. To one community, the crocodile that lurked in the river might be a terrifying yet sacred power. To another, the falcon soaring above the cliffs might be their guardian. Still others found divinity in the cat that kept their grain free of mice, or in the cow that gave milk and strength. The river itself was among the first and most sacred. Without the Nile, there was no life. And so the people gave it reverence. They saw it as a living force that could be angered or pleased. They left offerings on its banks: bread, beer, small figures made of clay. When the flood waters were gentle and generous, they believed the river was content. When the floods were too low, or too high, they believed something had gone wrong in their devotion. From these earliest days, the Egyptians began to think in patterns of order and chaos. The river brought order, predictable, life-giving renewal. The desert beyond represented chaos, death, dryness, the absence of life. And so, even before temples or priests, Egyptians shaped their worldview around the eternal balance between these two forces. Picture a farmer standing at the edge of his field. He looks out at the waters slowly receding after the flood. He sees new soil, rich and black, spread across the earth. He feels gratitude, but also humility. He knows this gift is beyond his control. He bows his head and whispers words into the breeze, words that are not yet written but are sacred nonetheless. Thank you, rise again next year. This gratitude turned into ritual. Villages developed simple ceremonies to honor the powers they believed controlled the Nile. Some sang songs as they sowed their seeds, calling upon unseen spirits to bless their crops. Others lit fires at the river's edge and cast offerings into the water. Slowly, these acts became traditions, passed from generation to generation. And over time, these spirits took on names, shapes, and stories. The great river was personified as a god of fertility and life, sometimes seen as Happy, the bringer of abundance. He was often imagined as a figure with a broad belly, heavy with nourishment, carrying jars of water from which life poured endlessly. Though Happy would only later become fully named in Egyptian mythology, the idea of such a presence was already forming in these earliest days. The sky above was equally sacred. The endless dome of blue by day, the glittering sea of stars by night, this too was alive. Many believed the sky was a great cow, stretching her body across the heavens, her milk the light of stars. Others imagined it as a goddess who arched over the earth, protecting it. Later, she would be called Nut, mother of the sky, but even in the beginning, people lifted their eyes and felt the presence of something divine above them. Life and death, too, demanded explanation. The cycle of the Nile mirrored the cycle of human life, rising, flourishing, retreating, and finally returning again. People began to wonder, if the river could return each year, could humans also return after death? Could the spirit live on, renewed like the floodwaters? These thoughts became the roots of one of Egypt's most enduring beliefs, the afterlife. Even before pyramids, even before mummification, Egyptians buried their dead with care. Bodies were placed in shallow graves in the desert sand, and sometimes small jars of food, tools, or ornaments were left beside them. These were not luxuries but provisions for a journey they believed the soul must take beyond death. In this way, death itself was softened. It was not an end, but a passage, a return, a cycle just like the Nile's flood. As centuries passed, these beliefs grew richer. Villages carved small shrines, placing symbols of animals or natural forces inside. The falcon, the crocodile, the lion, the cow, each was tied to a god or spirit, each became a vessel for worship. Priests emerged, not as full-time servants yet, but as respected figures who knew the proper rituals, who remembered the old stories. It was not a single religion, but a mosaic of beliefs. One village prayed to a falcon, another to a snake, another to the river itself. Yet all shared the same underlying truth: the world was alive, filled with gods and spirits, and humans had a duty to honor them. This mosaic of local gods would one day weave together into the grand pantheon of Egypt: Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and all the rest. But here, at the beginning, it was still small, intimate, close to the earth and the river. Pause here. Breathe slowly. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Nile in these earliest days. The sun is setting, casting gold across the water. A small fire crackles nearby. Families gather, placing food on reed mats, sharing stories of spirits in the sky and the river. Children listen wide-eyed, their faces lit by the glow. The world feels full of presence, full of mystery. And if you are still here with me, awake and listening, I'd like to gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these stories soothe you and carry you toward rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each day I'll bring you another journey into the past, told slowly and softly, meant to calm your mind and ease you into dreams. Now, let us return to Egypt. The spirits of the river grew more complex as Egypt grew more settled. By 3500 BCE, towns were larger, leaders stronger, and rituals more elaborate. Some communities built early temples, simple structures of mud brick where offerings could be made. Priests began to wear distinctive robes, carrying staffs, chanting prayers to call upon the unseen. It was in this period that Egyptians began to develop the idea of Ma'at. This was more than a goddess, more than a word, it was a principle, a truth. Ma'at meant balance, harmony, the order of the universe. The Nile represented Ma'at, always renewing, always reliable. The desert represented its opposite: chaos, disorder, death. To live rightly was to honor Ma'at, to keep balance, to respect the cycles of nature and the gods who controlled them. This principle would define Egyptian thought for thousands of years. Pharaohs would later claim their duty was to uphold Ma'at. Judges, priests, even ordinary farmers, all lived under this idea. It was not fear of punishment that bound them, but a shared reverence for balance, for harmony, for the eternal order of things. Over time, local gods merged into greater deities. The falcon became Horus, sky god and protector. The cow became Hathor, goddess of motherhood and joy. The crocodile became Sobek, fierce yet protective. And above all, the sun itself began to shine with divine meaning. The rising and setting of the sun mirrored life and death, birth and rebirth. The great sun god Ra would emerge from this reverence, his journey across the sky a symbol of eternal renewal. But we must remember, all of this began not in temples of stone, not in palaces of kings, but in the small villages of farmers and fishermen. It was born in their gratitude for the river, their awe of the sky, their hope for life after death. The grand mythology of Egypt began in the humble prayers of people living close to the earth. Now, as you drift towards sleep, picture the scene once more. The Nile lies calm, reflecting the silver of the moon. A soft wind moves through the reeds, carrying the distant sound of drums. In the firelight, a priest lifts his hands to the sky, calling upon spirits of river and sun. Families bow their heads. Children lean against their parents, half asleep, listening to stories of gods who live in water and sky. This is Egypt before the pyramids, before dynasties, before the glory of kings. A land alive with spirit, a people bound to the river, already dreaming of eternity. Thank you for joining me tonight. This has been Background Historian. Tomorrow, we will walk further into the story of Egypt, to the age of the two lands, when Upper and Lower Egypt grew proud, distinct, and ready for unification. Until then, close your eyes, rest deeply, and let the spirits of the river carry you into dreams. Sleep well. By around 3500 BCE, Egypt had become more than a collection of small farming communities. Villages had grown into towns, towns into small kingdoms. Across the long spine of the Nile, different centers of power emerged. The land itself seemed to split into two halves, each with its own identity. To the north lay Lower Egypt, the wide delta where the Nile fanned out in many branches before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. This land was flat, marshy, and green, filled with reeds and fish, fertile fields, and winding waterways. The people of the delta learned to navigate their swampy world in boats made of papyrus reeds. They wore wreaths of papyrus on their heads and worshipped cobra goddesses, fierce protectors of their marshy home. To the south lay Upper Egypt, the long, narrow stretch of land where the river cut between cliffs and desert hills. Here the Nile was stronger, faster, more commanding. Villages clung to the thin green ribbon of fertile soil pressed between river and desert. The people of Upper Egypt wore the lotus as their symbol, a flower that opened in the sun and closed at night. Their gods often took the form of falcons and vultures, soaring above the rocky cliffs. Though bound by the same river, these two regions were different worlds. Imagine standing in Lower Egypt. The air is humid, the smell of wet reeds and mud thick around you. Birds rise in clouds from the marshes, their cries echoing across the flat land. Fishermen push their boats through shallow channels, their poles digging into soft mud. Fields of barley spread far into the distance, watered easily by the river's many branches. Life here feels abundant, gentle, green. Now imagine traveling south into Upper Egypt. The river narrows. Its waters move swiftly, rushing between steep cliffs of red and gold. The land is tighter, the desert pressing close. Villages huddle in narrow strips of green, their fields smaller, their labor harder. Yet the people here are tough, proud, hardened by the demanding landscape. Above them, falcons circle in the bright sky. Life here feels sharper, more intense, shaped by stone and desert. The Egyptians came to see these differences not just as geography, but as identity. They were not simply people of the Nile. They were people of papyrus or lotus, people of cobra or falcon, people of the delta or the valley. As the two lands grew, so did their leaders. Chiefs became kings, rulers who claimed power not just by strength but by divine right. Each region developed its own royal symbols. The kings of Lower Egypt wore a red crown, shaped like a tall flat cap with a spiral rising at the front. The kings of Upper Egypt wore a white crown, tall and conical, gleaming in the sun. These crowns were more than decoration. They were symbols of authority, identity, and rivalry. To wear the red crown was to claim the marshes and the delta. To wear the white crown was to claim the valley and the cliffs. In time, these crowns would be joined into the famous double crown, symbol of a united Egypt. But for now, they stood apart, signs of division, pride, and competition. Both lands grew wealthier as farming improved and trade expanded. The Nile was a highway, carrying boats from north to south. Goods moved freely, grain, pottery, flint, fish, ivory, even exotic items from beyond Egypt's borders. Gold from Nubia, cedar wood from Lebanon, turquoise from Sinai, all began to appear in the hands of these early rulers. With trade came power. With power came ambition. And ambition meant conflict. By the late 4th millennium BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt were not just neighbors. They were rivals, each seeking to dominate the other. Armies clashed along the riverbanks. Kings sent warriors armed with stone maces, flint-tipped arrows, and spears to fight for territory. Carved artifacts from this time show scenes of battle, rulers striking down enemies, armies advancing with banners held high. The Nile, once a gentle lifeline, became a highway of war. And yet, through all this rivalry, the Egyptians remained bound by the same worldview. Both lands honored the same cycles, the flood, the planting, the harvest. Both lands worshipped gods of sun and sky, earth and river. Their symbols were different, but their foundations were the same. It was as if the two lands were siblings, different, proud, quarrelsome, but belonging always to the same family. In fact, later Egyptians would call their land not Egypt, but simply Kemet, the Black Land, after the rich soil left by the flood. And they would call their rulers Nswt, kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, acknowledging that both regions were inseparable. But here, in these early centuries, they were still learning how to live together, still learning how to be one. Take a breath here. Imagine the river flowing between two worlds. To the north, wide marshes buzzing with insects, alive with birds and boats. To the south, narrow valleys pressed by cliffs, falcons wheeling overhead. Feel the contrast, yet also the connection, as the Nile ties them together. And if you are still awake with me, listening to these quiet rhythms of history, let me pause for a gentle reminder. This is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys soothe you and carry you towards sleep, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we'll walk further into the past together, calm, steady, with history unfolding softly in the background. Now, let us drift back to the two lands. In both Upper and Lower Egypt, religion deepened. Each region favored its own gods, but both wove them into stories of creation, balance, and renewal. Temples began to rise, simple at first, built from mud brick, but increasingly elaborate. Priests gained authority, guiding rituals that ensured the floods would return, the sun would rise, the order of the world would remain intact. Art flourished too. Pottery from this time shows intricate designs. Boats sailing the river, hunters with bows, animals painted in flowing lines. These were not just decorations. They were records of a people proud of their land, their lives, their growing kingdoms. As centuries passed, the rivalry between Upper and Lower Egypt grew sharper. Battles became more frequent, leaders more ambitious. But there was also a sense of destiny forming. The Egyptians began to imagine not two lands, but one. They began to dream of a king who would wear both the red crown and the white crown, uniting papyrus and lotus, cobra and falcon, delta and valley. That dream would soon become reality. But before unification came a long age of struggle. Kings carved their victories into stone, boasting of conquests and rivals defeated. One famous artifact, known as the Narmer palette, shows a ruler striking down his enemies while wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one side, and the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other. It is both a work of art and a political message, a promise that Egypt would one day be whole. We do not know every detail of how unification came to pass. But we know that by around 3100 BCE, one king, Narmer, sometimes called Menes, succeeded where others had failed. He defeated his rivals, claimed both crowns, and became the first pharaoh of a united Egypt. With him, history as we know it truly began. Now, as you rest and drift towards sleep, imagine this moment before unity. The two lands, each proud, each strong, standing face to face across the Nile. The marshes of the north, green and abundant. The cliffs of the south, rocky and fierce. Two crowns glinting in the sun. Two peoples waiting for the day they would become one. This is the threshold of Egypt's greatness, the stage upon which its story would unfold for thousands of years. By the year 3100 BCE, the rivalry between Upper and Lower Egypt had stretched for generations. Kings in the north wore the red crown, kings in the south the white. Armies marched, battles raged, each side determined to claim dominance. Yet amid this long struggle, one king rose above the others. His name was Narmer, ruler of Upper Egypt. We do not know every detail of his life. He lived more than 5,000 years ago, in a world without written histories as we know them. What we do know comes from fragments, pottery shards, carvings, a remarkable stone palette bearing his name. From these, a story emerges, not perfectly clear, but powerful enough to echo through the centuries. According to tradition, Narmer defeated the kings of Lower Egypt, uniting the two lands into one kingdom. He wore the double crown, combining the white of Upper Egypt with the red of Lower Egypt, a symbol that would endure as the mark of pharaohs for millennia. His reign marked the beginning of Egypt's first dynasty, the foundation upon which all later history would stand. Imagine the scene. Narmer's army marches north along the Nile. Warriors carry stone maces, flint knives, spears tipped with sharpened copper. Banners wave in the wind, each marked with sacred animals, falcons, lions, bulls. The sound of drums and chants rises into the desert air. In the delta, the armies clash. The marshes echo with shouts, the river runs red with struggle. Narmer, tall and commanding, strikes down his enemy. Later, artists carve the scene into stone, Narmer raising his mace above a kneeling foe, wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. On the other side of the palette, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, inspecting rows of defeated men. The message is clear: Narmer has conquered. Narmer has united. Narmer is king of all Egypt. But beyond battle, this moment is more than conquest. It is the creation of identity. For the first time, the two lands are one. The Nile is no longer divided into north and south, papyrus and lotus, cobra and falcon. Under Narmer, Egypt is a single kingdom, bound together by crown, by river, by divine will. Pharaoh. The word itself comes from later times, but the idea begins here. The king is not just a man. He is the living embodiment of the god's order. He is Horus, the falcon god, made flesh. His duty is not only to rule, but to maintain ma'at, balance, harmony, the eternal rhythm of the universe. Narmer's subjects did not see him as a distant ruler, but as a bridge between human and divine. His presence ensured the floods would return, the sun would rise, the world would remain steady. To obey Narmer was to obey the gods. To honor Narmer was to honor the very balance of existence. This idea of kingship would define Egypt forever. From Narmer onward, every pharaoh was not just a leader but a god on earth, responsible for the order of the cosmos. Pause with me for a moment. Imagine yourself in a crowd in Memphis. The new capital Narmer is said to have founded at the meeting point of Upper and Lower Egypt. The people gather along the riverbank. Drums beat. Priests carry standards adorned with falcons and cobras. And then the king appears, tall, crowned with both red and white, gleaming in ceremonial robes. The crowd bows low, for this is not only their ruler but their protector, their connection to the divine. And if you are still with me, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys soothe you, if they bring you calm as you drift toward rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we'll travel further into the past, soft and steady, history unfolding in the background as you close your eyes. Now, let us return to Narmer. The unification of Egypt under Narmer was not the end of struggle but the beginning of stability. With the two lands united, Egypt entered a new age, the early dynastic period. Kings of the first and second dynasties built the foundations of government, religion, and culture that would shape the Old Kingdom and beyond. Narmer himself, according to tradition, established Memphis as Egypt's capital. Positioned near the border between Upper and Lower Egypt, Memphis symbolized unity. From here, the pharaoh could oversee the entire land, from the rocky cliffs of the south to the green marshes of the north. Administration grew more complex. Officials were appointed to manage irrigation, collect taxes, organize labor. Scribes began to record more events in hieroglyphs. Temples expanded, their priests carrying out rituals to honor the gods and ensure the prosperity of the land. The idea of kingship became ritualized. Pharaohs were buried in elaborate tombs at Abydos, each one accompanied by offerings, servants, and sacred objects. The afterlife was no longer just a dream of villagers. It was a royal promise, woven into the very institution of kingship. But Narmer's reign was more than administration. It was symbolic. His very image, the double crown, the palette bearing his name, the falcon god Horus hovering above him, told a story that would be retold for centuries. Egypt was united. Egypt was eternal. Egypt was divine. For the people, this meant stability. Farmers planted their fields knowing the king would protect the irrigation canals. Traders carried goods up and down the river under royal banners. Priests led ceremonies with confidence, assured that the pharaoh embodied the god's will. Life was not easy, but it was ordered, reliable, steady, just as the Egyptians believed the universe itself should be. As you rest now, picture the world Narmer created. The Nile, flowing calm and strong, binding north and south into one. Villages growing into towns, towns into cities, cities into a kingdom that stretched from the delta to the deserts. A king crowned with red and white, holding the mace of power, the falcon of Horus hovering above him. This is the dawn of dynastic Egypt, the beginning of more than 3,000 years of history, faith, and grandeur. Narmer, the first pharaoh, set it all in motion. Long before Egypt had pyramids, it had symbols. As early as 3300 BCE, small marks appear on pottery, ivory tags, and clay tablets. At first, these marks were simple: lines, animals, shapes. They identified ownership, labeled goods, marked graves. A jar of oil might carry a small sign indicating its owner. A tag tied to a basket of grain might show which temple it belonged to. But these marks were more than decorations. They were the first steps toward something greater. Over time, the Egyptians realized that symbols could stand not just for objects, but for sounds, ideas, and names. A falcon could represent the bird itself, or the god Horus, or even the sound of the word Hor, a ripple of water could mean water, but also the sound N. Slowly, carefully, this system grew richer and more complex. By the time of Narmer and the First Dynasty, Egypt had developed a true writing system, hieroglyphs. The word hieroglyph comes much later, from Greek, meaning sacred carving. But for the Egyptians, these symbols were more than writing. They were alive, filled with power. To carve a name in stone was to make it endure forever. To write a prayer was to give it life beyond the speaker's lips. Hieroglyphs were intricate, beautiful, and symbolic. There were over 700 signs, each one carefully drawn: falcons, cobras, lions, reeds, waves, stars, eyes, arms, feet, thrones. Some represented sounds, like letters. Others represented whole words or ideas. Many could be combined, their meanings shifting like pieces of a puzzle. Imagine a scribe at work. He sits cross-legged on a mat, a roll of papyrus before him. In one hand, he holds a reed pen, its tip chewed to make it soft. In the other, a small palette of black and red ink. With slow, careful strokes, he paints symbols across the page. A falcon. A throne. A ripple of water. Together they spell the name of a king. He pauses, then continues, his movement steady, his mind sharp. This is no simple task. To be a scribe is to hold power. At first, writing was used mostly for practical matters. Pharaohs needed records, lists of goods collected as taxes, inventories of offerings to the gods, tallies of workers and soldiers. In a kingdom as large as Egypt, order depended on record-keeping. Without writing, the pharaoh's reach would be limited to what he could personally oversee. With writing, his authority extended across the two lands, carved into stone and painted on papyrus for all to see. But writing was not only for administration. It was also for memory. Pharaohs wanted their names preserved forever. They wanted their victories, their rituals, their devotion to the gods remembered by future generations. And so hieroglyphs began to appear on temple walls, tombs, and monuments. The story of Egypt itself was written into stone. One of the earliest examples is the Narmer palette, carved around 3100 BCE. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, striking down a foe. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, inspecting the bodies of the defeated. Beside him are hieroglyphs, a catfish, Nar, and a chisel, Mer. Together, they spell his name. It is one of the first recorded names in history, carved in stone, preserved for over 5,000 years. Pause with me here. Picture the Narmer palette in your mind, a slab of dark green stone, carved with careful lines. See the falcon of Horus perched above, the king towering over his enemies, the hieroglyphs spelling out his name. Imagine running your hand over the grooves, feeling the weight of history in stone. And if you are still awake, still listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these journeys through history calm you and carry you toward rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we'll return to the past together, slowly and softly, with stories meant to soothe. Now, let us return to the scribes of Egypt. Scribes became some of the most important people in the kingdom. They were not warriors, farmers, or priests. they were something different. They carried knowledge, the ability to capture words, commands, and prayers in writing. Without them, the kingdom could not function. Children who trained as scribes studied for years. They memorized hundreds of hieroglyphs, practiced writing them over and over. They learned to write not only in the full, elaborate hieroglyphs used on temples, but also in quicker, simpler scripts used for daily business, like hieratic. This more practical form allowed scribes to write quickly on papyrus, keeping up with the demands of administration. Because literacy was rare, scribes were respected. They often rose to high positions in government. A skilled scribe could become an overseer of workers, a tax collector, even an advisor to the pharaoh. For ordinary Egyptians, writing was a mystery. For scribes, it was power. Papyrus, too, was an Egyptian invention that changed history. Made from the stalks of the papyrus plant that grew in abundance along the Nile, it was cut, soaked, pressed, and dried into sheets. Unlike clay tablets or stone, papyrus was light, portable, and easy to write on. Scrolls of papyrus could be stored in boxes, carried along the river, or copied when needed. Imagine walking into an early archive in Memphis. Shelves of wooden boxes line the walls. Inside each box are rolls of papyrus, tied with string, neatly labeled with small tags. One contains lists of taxes collected from farmers. Another contains prayers to the gods. Another records the names of soldiers sent on campaign. Each scroll is fragile, yet powerful, the heartbeat of a kingdom preserved in ink and reed. Writing also shaped Egyptian religion. Words were seen as magical, alive. To speak a spell was powerful, but to write it down was even more so. A prayer carved on a tomb wall was eternal, ensuring the dead would be nourished in the afterlife. A curse inscribed on a tablet could protect a grave from robbers. Writing gave permanence to belief, bridging the gap between human and divine. As dynasties passed, hieroglyphs became more elaborate. They filled temple walls with scenes of gods and pharaohs, surrounded by flowing inscriptions. They told stories of creation, of battles, of rituals performed for eternity. For the Egyptians, to carve was to preserve, to write was to make real. Now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself as a scribe, sitting cross-legged by the river. The sun is setting, casting gold across the water. You dip your reed pen into ink and press it gently onto the papyrus. The symbols flow beneath your hand, falcons, waves, stars, eyes. With each stroke, you feel a quiet power. You are capturing time itself, giving memory a body that will outlast you. This is the dawn of writing. The moment when Egypt moved from spoken story to recorded history. The moment when the voices of the past became visible, carved into stone, painted onto papyrus, whispering across millennia. After Narmer united the two lands, Egypt needed a capital that could stand as a symbol of unity. Tradition tells us that he founded Memphis, located at the meeting point of Upper and Lower Egypt, where the river spread toward the delta. It was a perfect choice. From Memphis, the pharaoh could rule both north and south, maintaining balance between the lotus and the papyrus, the white crown and the red. Memphis quickly grew into a thriving city. At its center stood the royal palace, surrounded by high mud brick walls. Within, courtyards opened to the sky, lined with columns painted in bright colors. Servants bustled about, carrying jars of water, baskets of bread, and trays of fruit. Officials hurried between rooms, clutching rolls of papyrus. Musicians played soft notes on harps and flutes to entertain the king. Outside the palace, the city stretched wide. Workshops filled with potters, jewelers, and stonecutters rang with the sound of labor. Markets bustled with farmers selling grain, fishermen displaying their catch, and traders offering goods from distant lands. Priests tended temples, burning incense to the gods. Soldiers marched in formation, their copper weapons glinting in the sun. Memphis was not only the seat of kings, it was the pulse of Egypt. The court of the pharaoh was a world unto itself. At its center sat the king, the living embodiment of Horus, responsible for keeping Ma'at, the order and balance of the world. Around him gathered officials, priests, scribes, and servants, each playing a role in the great machinery of the kingdom. The vizier was the most powerful of these officials, second only to the king. He oversaw taxes, justice, building projects, and administration. Nothing escaped his attention. Under him worked scribes who recorded every bushel of grain, every offering to the gods, every command from the throne. Judges and overseers maintained order, while priests ensured that rituals were performed correctly so the gods remained satisfied. It was an intricate system, remarkable for its time. And yet, at its heart, it all revolved around one man, the pharaoh. His word was law, his presence divine. Imagine the daily life of a king in Memphis. At dawn, he is woken by servants who wash him in scented water and dress him in fine linen. He wears a kilt stiffened with starch, jewelry of gold and lapis, and the white or red crown depending on the ceremony of the day. He is brought food, bread, beer, figs, dates, roasted goose. Musicians play softly as he eats. After breakfast, he moves to the audience hall. Courtiers and officials bow low as he enters. The vizier reads reports from across the kingdom, the level of the Nile, the state of the harvest, the progress of building projects, the training of soldiers. The king listens, nods, and issues commands. Scribes record his words quickly, turning them into orders to be carried out across Egypt. Later, the king visits temples to offer sacrifices to the gods. He pours libations of wine, burns incense, and lays bread on altars. The priests chant hymns, thanking him for his devotion. For in Egypt, the king is not only ruler of men but high priest of the gods. Without him, the balance of the universe itself might falter. Pause here. Picture the scene. A wide courtyard in Memphis, filled with priests in white linen robes. Smoke rises from braziers. The pharaoh, crowned and robed, pours water over a sacred statue. Around him, the people bow, their eyes lowered. To them, this is not a man performing a ritual, it is Horus himself, ensuring that the gods are honored and Egypt endures. And if you are still here, awake and listening, let me remind you gently, this is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys soothe you, if they bring you calm as you fall towards sleep, I invite you to subscribe. Each day we'll walk further into the past together, softly and slowly, with history unfolding in the background. Now, let us return to the palace at Memphis. Beyond rituals and commands, life in the court was full of ceremony. Festivals marked the seasons. One of the most important was the Sed festival, a celebration of the king's reign. After 30 years on the throne, the pharaoh was expected to renew his strength and prove his vitality. Dressed in ceremonial robes, he ran a ritual race, symbolizing his ability to continue ruling. The festival was both a political statement and a religious renewal, tying the health of the king to the health of the kingdom. The palace itself was decorated with scenes of gods and symbols of power. Lions, falcons, cobras, and bulls adorned walls and thrones. The pharaoh sat beneath canopies painted with stars, reminding all that he ruled not just the earth, but under the eternal gaze of the heavens. Around him, courtiers sought favor. Ambitious men bowed low, offering gifts of gold or rare stones. Priests whispered prayers in his ear. Advisors suggested strategies for war, trade, or diplomacy. The court was a place of constant motion, buzzing with activity, yet always centered on the calm authority of the king. Outside the palace walls, Memphis thrived. Farmers brought their goods to market, filling baskets with onions, garlic, cucumbers, and melons. Bakers sold loaves of bread still warm from the oven. Brewers offered jars of beer, the staple drink of Egypt. Fishermen laid out catfish, perch, and tilapia, freshly caught from the Nile. Traders brought exotic goods, incense from Punt, cedar wood from Lebanon, turquoise from Sinai. The city was a meeting place of cultures, a crossroads of trade. In workshops, artisans crafted jewelry from gold, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. Potters shaped clay into jars and bowls, their hands steady on the wheel. Stonecutters carved statues of kings and gods, their chisels striking rhythmically against stone. The sound of labor filled the air, a constant hum of creation. The temples of Memphis, too, were grand. The most important was dedicated to Ptah, god of craftsmen and creation. Priests there spoke of Ptah as the mind and tongue that shaped the world, the divine craftsman who spoke reality into being. It was fitting that Memphis, a city of builders and artisans, should honor him above all. As night fell, Memphis came alive in another way. Fires flickered in the streets, families gathered to eat, musicians played harps and flutes, dancers performed in the courtyards of the wealthy. The king himself dined on roast meats, fruits, and wine, entertained by jesters and acrobats. Yet even in these moments of ease, his divine duty remained. The pharaoh was never only a man. He was the balance of Egypt, the living Horus, the one who kept the Nile flowing and the sun rising. Now, as you lie back and listen, imagine the city of Memphis. Hear the clatter of markets, the chants of priests, the hammering of craftsmen. See the palace rising above it all, its walls painted bright, its courtyards filled with courtiers and servants. At its heart, the pharaoh sits, crowned and robed, calm and eternal. Around him spins the life of Egypt, steady as the river, eternal as the stars. This is the court of kings, the world that grew from Narmer's unification, the foundation of dynastic Egypt. From here, the kingdom would grow stronger, wealthier, more ambitious. And soon, it would begin building monuments that would defy time itself. By the 27th century BCE, Egypt was in its third dynasty. The unification of the two lands was now long established, and pharaohs ruled with authority across the Nile Valley. Kings were no longer just chiefs or warlords. They were divine, living Horus on earth. Their power was immense, their duties cosmic. But with such power came a pressing question: how could they ensure their presence lasted beyond death? Earlier kings had been buried in mastabas, flat-roofed tombs made of mud brick or stone. These tombs were sturdy, but they were modest. A mastaba could honor a king, but it did not match the grandeur of a god on earth. Pharaoh Djoser, the second king of the third dynasty, wanted something greater, something eternal. For this task, he turned to his vizier, his trusted architect, and a man whose name would echo through history, Imhotep. Imhotep was more than an architect. He was a priest, a healer, a scholar. He studied the stars, the body, the flow of the Nile. He understood not only stone and measurement, but the rhythm of the universe. To Djoser, he was more than an advisor, he was the man who could make eternity real. Together, they envisioned something the world had never seen. Instead of building a single mastaba, Imhotep designed a structure of 6 stacked mastabas, each one smaller than the one below it. Rising tier upon tier, it formed a great staircase of stone, what we now call the step pyramid. Imagine the awe of the workers as they stood before this plan. No one had ever attempted such a thing. The mastabas of old were built with mud brick, simple and fragile. But Imhotep would use stone, cut limestone blocks, shaped and fitted with precision. This would not crumble in a few generations. This would endure forever. The construction began at Saqqara, a vast necropolis near Memphis. Thousands of workers gathered, farmers during the flood season, artisans, stonecutters, haulers. They quarried limestone, cutting blocks from the cliffs and dragging them on sledges across the desert. Wooden rollers and ropes groaned under the weight. Songs rose to keep rhythm as men pulled together, the sound of human determination echoing across the sand. Slowly, layer by layer, the pyramid grew. First one mastaba, then another stacked above it, and another still. 6 tiers in all, climbing 200 feet into the sky. From miles away, it could be seen rising from the desert, a mountain made by human hands. Pause for a moment. Picture it in your mind. The desert stretches flat and endless, golden under the sun. And then, breaking the horizon, a great stairway of stone rises upward. 6 levels, each one narrower, each one reaching toward the heavens. The step pyramid of Djoser, the first pyramid in history, the first great stone building on earth. And if you are still awake with me, I'll gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these nightly stories calm you, if they help you drift into sleep while wandering the past, I invite you to subscribe. Each day we'll step deeper into history together, softly and slowly, a quiet journey meant for rest. Now, let us return to Saqqara. The step pyramid was not just a tomb. It was part of a vast complex designed by Imhotep. Around it stretched courtyards, temples, and shrines, all enclosed within a massive wall of white limestone. Inside were chapels for rituals, courtyards for festivals, and storerooms for offerings. Priests would tend these spaces long after Djoser's death, ensuring his soul remained nourished in the afterlife. The complex was also a symbol. It was laid out with precision, aligned to the cardinal points, echoing the order of the universe. To walk its courtyards was to step into a sacred landscape, where every wall and column spoke of balance and eternity. Inside the pyramid itself lay a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. At its heart was the burial chamber of Djoser, deep underground, lined with granite brought from Aswan. Around it were storage rooms filled with offerings, treasures, and symbolic objects. The walls were decorated with blue tiles, imitating reed mats, reminders of the simpler homes of the earliest kings, now transformed into eternal stone. For the Egyptians, the step pyramid was more than a monument to Djoser. It was proof that their civilization could command eternity. Stone was no longer just a tool for building shrines or walls. It was the material of immortality. The sight of the pyramid must have been overwhelming for ordinary Egyptians. Farmers arriving at Saqqara with offerings for the dead would have looked up at the towering monument with awe. Traders sailing down the Nile could see its silhouette from afar, gleaming in the sun. Priests performing rituals in its shadow must have felt the weight of its meaning. Egypt had stepped into eternity. Imhotep's genius did not end with stone. He understood symbolism. The pyramid was shaped like a staircase, rising tier by tier. To the Egyptians, this was not only a tomb. It was a stairway for the king's soul, leading him upward to join the gods. In life, Djoser was Horus on earth. In death, he would climb the steps to join Ra, the sun god, in the sky. This idea, that the pharaoh's tomb was not only a resting place but a bridge to the divine, would define all the pyramids that followed. From Djoser's step pyramid grew the smooth-sided pyramids of Sneferu and Khufu, culminating in the Great Pyramid of Giza. All of it began here, with Imhotep's bold vision. Imhotep himself became a legend. In later centuries, Egyptians worshipped him as a god of wisdom and healing. They told stories of his great knowledge, his mastery of medicine, architecture, and magic. His name endured for millennia, long after Djoser's reign was forgotten. In many ways, Imhotep was as eternal as the pyramid he built. And Djoser, too, achieved what he desired. Though thousands of years have passed, his pyramid still stands. Weathered, broken in places, but unmistakable. A stairway of stone, reaching into the sky, carrying his name across time. Now, as you lie back and drift toward rest, imagine yourself standing in Saqqara at sunset. The desert glows red and gold, the air still and heavy. Before you, the step pyramid rises, its tiers bathed in fading light. Around you, priests chant softly, smoke rising from burning incense. The wind carries the sound of distant flutes. You tilt your head back, gazing up at the stairway of eternity, and you feel the quiet power of a civilization stepping into forever. This is the step pyramid of Djoser, the first great pyramid, the first stairway to the heavens, the first true monument of eternity. By the time Sneferu came to power, around 2613 BCE, Egypt was strong, wealthy, and ambitious. The Old Kingdom was beginning, and the pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty commanded a vast and organized state. Agriculture flourished, trade routes stretched across deserts and seas, and the royal court in Memphis was a center of power and ceremony. But Sneferu wanted more than stability. He wanted greatness. He wanted to leave behind not just one monument, but a legacy of innovation that would outshine all who came before him. Sneferu began his reign by commissioning a pyramid at Midam, a site south of Saqqara. At first, the pyramid was built as a step structure, like Djoser's. But partway through construction, Sneferu ordered a bold change. The steps were filled in with limestone casing to create smooth sides. This was the first attempt at transforming the stair-step design into the sleek, triangular pyramid we recognize today. For the workers, it was a daunting task. Blocks of limestone had to be cut, hauled, and fitted with precision. Ramps of mud brick and rubble stretched up the sides, allowing teams of men to drag stones higher and higher. Dust filled the air, ropes strained, sledges groaned. The sound of hammer and chisel rang across the desert. But when it was finished, the Mighty Pyramid did not stand long. Its casing collapsed, leaving behind a strange, tower-like core surrounded by rubble. To later generations, it was known as the collapsed pyramid. For Sneferu, it was his first lesson. Stone could reach for the heavens, but it demanded respect, precision, and patience. Undeterred, Sneferu tried again. He moved north to Dashur, where the desert stretched wide and flat. Here he began building a second pyramid, larger and grander than the first. At first, construction went smoothly. Layers of stone rose steadily, angled upward toward the sky. But as the pyramid climbed, cracks began to appear. The weight of the stone pressed too heavily on the lower levels. The builders realized the angle was too steep. To save the structure, they changed course. At about halfway up, the slope was reduced, giving the pyramid its unusual bent shape. Today, we call it the bent pyramid. From a distance, it looks almost playful, rising steeply, then suddenly slanting at a softer angle. But for Sneferu's builders, it was a moment of crisis, an experiment saved from collapse. Even so, the bent pyramid was still extraordinary. Unlike the Mighty Pyramid, its casing of smooth limestone still survives in many places, giving us a glimpse of how these monuments gleamed in the sun when first completed. Imagine standing in the desert at Dashur as the bent pyramid neared completion. Thousands of workers labor under the sun. Men haul blocks of stone on sledges, singing chants to keep time. Overseers call out orders, their voices carrying across the sand. Priests perform rituals to bless the work, sprinkling water, offering bread and beer to the gods. Slowly, the pyramid rises, its unusual shape taking form against the horizon. For ordinary Egyptians, it must have been astonishing. To see not just one, but two great stone mountains rising from the desert, built by human hands, it was proof of the pharaoh's divine power, his ability to command labor, stone, and eternity. Still, Sneferu was not satisfied. The Mighty Pyramid had collapsed. The bent pyramid was flawed. He wanted perfection. And so, once more, he ordered a pyramid at Dashur, his third great experiment. This time, the builders had learned from their mistakes. They chose a shallower angle, carefully balanced to bear the weight of millions of stones. They laid foundations deeper, stronger, more secure. Block by block, the pyramid rose, each stone fitted with precision. The result was the Red Pyramid, named for the reddish limestone that now covers its surface. It was Egypt's first true, smooth-sided pyramid, standing over 340 feet tall. From a distance, it looked like a mountain rising from the desert, perfect in its geometry, steady and eternal. For the first time, Egypt had achieved the shape that would define its civilization for centuries. Pause with me here. Imagine the Red Pyramid at sunset. Its sides glow golden in the fading light, sharp and smooth, rising to a perfect point against the sky. Around it, the desert lies silent, broken only by the sound of wind. It is not just a tomb. It is eternity made stone. And if you are still with me, awake and listening, I'll pause here for a gentle reminder. This is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys calm you, if they bring you peace as you drift into sleep, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we'll return to history together, softly and slowly, with stories meant to carry you into rest. Now, let us return to Sneferu. Sneferu's three pyramids, at Mighty, Dashur's Bent Pyramid, and Dashur's Red Pyramid, marked a revolution in architecture. They were not simply tombs. They were statements of power, of ambition, of divine authority. Each one was a step in a long experiment, each one bringing Egypt closer to perfection. Inside the Red Pyramid, corridors and chambers were cut deep into the stone. The walls were smooth, the ceilings corbelled to bear immense weight. The burial chamber lay hidden within, ready to receive the king who had dared to build three mountains. Surrounding the pyramid was a mortuary temple where priests would perform rituals for eternity. They brought offerings of bread, beer, fruit, and incense, ensuring Sneferu's spirit would live forever in the afterlife. For the people, the sight of these pyramids must have been humbling. To live in Sneferu's reign was to see human ambition reach heights never imagined before. Each pyramid was a promise that Egypt, like its kings, was eternal. Sneferu himself became legendary. Later generations remembered him not only as a great builder but as a kind and generous ruler. Stories tell of him sailing on the Nile with maidens rowing, of him bringing joy and abundance to his people. Whether true or not, these tales reflected his legacy, a pharaoh who gave Egypt not only stability but splendor. His son, Khufu, would follow him and build the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most famous of all. But without Sneferu's experiments, without the lessons of Midam, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid, the Great Pyramid could never have risen. Sneferu laid the foundation not only of stone, but of vision. Now, as you rest, imagine the desert once more. The sun sets, and 3 pyramids rise against the sky, one collapsed, a pile of broken stone, one bent, its angle shifting halfway up, and one perfect, smooth and steady, glowing in the fading light. Together they tell a story, not of failure, but of learning, striving, and reaching toward eternity. This is Sneferu's legacy, the pharaoh who built 3 pyramids, who turned experiments into triumph, who gave Egypt the true pyramid, the eternal mountain of stone. Khufu was the son of Sneferu, inheriting not only the throne of Egypt but also his father's ambition. If Sneferu was the experimenter, Khufu was the perfectionist. He would take the lessons of Midam, the Bent Pyramid, and the Red Pyramid, and he would surpass them all. Around 2580 BCE, Khufu ordered the construction of a pyramid at Giza, a rocky plateau overlooking the Nile near modern-day Cairo. It was an ambitious choice, for the ground was solid and elevated, visible for miles in every direction. Here, Khufu would raise his eternal mountain. The Great Pyramid was designed to rise over 480 feet tall, built from an estimated 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing over 70 tons. Its base stretched more than 750 feet on each side, perfectly aligned with the cardinal points of the compass. Even today, its precision astounds engineers. Stones were cut, hauled, and placed with such care that the joints between them are often no thicker than a sheet of paper. This was no experiment. This was mastery. Imagine the construction site at Giza. Thousands of workers labor under the blazing sun. Some quarry limestone from the nearby cliffs, their chisels striking rhythmically against stone. Others haul blocks on wooden sledges, pouring water on the sand to reduce friction as teams of men drag the stones forward. Overseers shout orders, their voices carried on the dry wind. Priests bless the work with offerings of bread and beer. Ramps of mud brick and rubble rise along the pyramid sides, allowing stones to be dragged higher and higher. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and determination. Day after day, year after year, the pyramid grows, layer upon layer, a mountain slowly rising from human hands. For the Egyptians, this was not just labor. It was devotion. To build for the pharaoh was to build for eternity. It was an offering to the gods, a guarantee of divine favor for the kingdom. Each block placed was a prayer, each stone a promise. At last, after perhaps 2 decades of work, the pyramid was complete. In its prime, it was covered in smooth casing stones of white Tura limestone, polished to a gleam. In the sunlight, it shone like a jewel, a beacon visible for miles across the desert and river. At night, under the stars, it seemed to merge with the heavens themselves, its peak pointing toward eternity. Inside lay a labyrinth of passages and chambers. The king's chamber, deep within, was built from massive blocks of granite hauled from quarries hundreds of miles to the south. Above it, a series of relieving chambers distributed the weight of stone, a feat of engineering unmatched for centuries. The grand gallery, a long ascending passage, rose steeply toward the chamber, its walls lined with precision-cut stones. Though looters would rob the tomb long ago, the architecture itself was the treasure. Every corridor, every chamber, every block spoke of genius, patience, and vision. Pause with me. Picture yourself standing at the base of the Great Pyramid in its prime. The white limestone casing gleams in the sunlight, so bright it almost blinds you. The sides rise steeply, perfectly smooth, to a point that pierces the sky. Around you, priests chant hymns, incense curls upward, and thousands of Egyptians gaze in awe. It is not just a building, it is eternity, shimmering before your eyes. And if you are still with me, listening softly, let me remind you gently, this is Background Historian. If these nightly stories soothe you and help you rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we'll travel deeper into history, softly and slowly, letting the past carry us toward dreams. Now, let us return to Giza. Khufu's Great Pyramid did not stand alone. Around it rose an entire necropolis, a city of the dead. Smaller pyramids for queens stood nearby, each one elegant and precise. Rows of mastabas housed the tombs of nobles and officials, their walls decorated with scenes of daily life. Temples for rituals and causeways for processions stretched from the pyramid to the Nile, connecting the tomb to the living world. And guarding it all was a figure as mysterious as it is famous, the Great Sphinx. Carved from limestone near the pyramid, it bore the body of a lion and the head of a king. Many believe it represents Khafre, Khufu's son, but its true origin remains debated. To the Egyptians, it was a guardian, watching over the plateau, its gaze fixed eternally on the horizon. Together, the pyramids and the Sphinx formed a sacred landscape, a place where earth met sky, where mortals touched eternity. The building of the Great Pyramid was a feat not only of engineering but of organization. Farmers worked during the flood season, when their fields lay underwater, providing labor for the king. Skilled artisans cut stone, crafted tools, and decorated tombs. Overseers managed teams, ensuring precision and discipline. Far from the image of slaves, evidence suggests these workers were well-fed and housed in nearby villages. Excavations at Giza reveal bakeries, breweries, and barracks where workers lived. Bread, beer, meat, and vegetables sustained them, and the pride of building for the king gave their labor meaning. To live in Khufu's time was to be part of something greater than oneself. Each man's handprint on a block was a contribution to eternity. Khufu's reign was remembered with awe, but also with a sense of fear. Later traditions, recorded centuries afterward, paint him as a harsh ruler. Some stories describe him as cruel, demanding, even impious. Whether true or not, these tales reflect the shadow cast by his monument. To build something so vast, so eternal, must have seemed to his descendants both a triumph and a warning. Yet the Great Pyramid endured. Long after Khufu's name faded, his pyramid remained. Through storms, earthquakes, and centuries of change, it stood. When the ancient Greeks visited Egypt, they placed it among the 7 wonders of the world, marveling at its size and precision. Even today, it is the only wonder that still survives, a bridge across time, a whisper of eternity. Now, as you rest, imagine yourself walking along the Giza Plateau at twilight. The sun sinks low, painting the desert gold. The pyramid towers above you, its sides glowing in the fading light. The Sphinx gazes silently into the horizon, its shadow stretching long across the sand. Around you, the air is still, heavy with the weight of centuries. You tilt your head back, gazing upward at the vast stone mountain, and you feel very small, yet somehow eternal. This is the glory of Giza. The moment when Egypt reached its peak of ambition, raising monuments that would outlast empires, languages, and even memory itself. For the Egyptians, the world was alive with divinity. The river, the sky, the sun, the stars, the fertile fields, all were filled with spirit and power. Every aspect of existence was guided by gods, each one with a face, a story, a role in the balance of the universe. But the Egyptians did not believe in a single fixed set of gods. Their pantheon was vast and layered, with local deities blending into national ones, stories shifting across centuries. A crocodile god might be supreme in one village, while a cow goddess was beloved in another. Yet over time, certain gods rose to prominence, becoming the great figures who defined Egyptian religion. At the center of all stood the sun god Ra. Each morning, Ra rose in the east, sailing across the sky in his solar boat. Each evening, he descended into the west, traveling through the underworld, only to rise again at dawn. His journey symbolized life, death, and rebirth, the eternal cycle that governed all things. Ra was often depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with a blazing sun disk. Priests in Heliopolis built great temples to him, offering hymns at sunrise. To the Egyptians, Ra was not only the light that warmed their fields but the supreme power that gave order to the universe. Yet Ra was not alone. Another great figure was Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Osiris was a king who, according to myth, had once ruled Egypt in peace and prosperity. But his brother Set grew jealous and murdered him, cutting his body into pieces and scattering them across the land. Osiris's wife, Isis, gathered the fragments, restored him, and with her magic brought him back to life. Osiris did not return to rule the living. Instead, he became Lord of the Dead, ruler of the underworld. To the Egyptians, this myth explained both death and hope. Though life ended, the soul could be renewed, just as Osiris was renewed by Isis. In funerary rituals, Osiris was central. Pharaohs claimed to become Osiris in death, while their sons became Horus, avenging and succeeding them. Ordinary Egyptians, too, hoped to join Osiris, to live again in the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal harvests. Beside Osiris stood his wife, Isis. She was the Great Mother, the goddess of love, magic, and devotion. Often shown with a throne on her head, she was both nurturing and powerful. Her love for Osiris, her grief at his death, and her determination to restore him made her one of the most beloved deities in Egypt. Their son, Horus, completed the sacred triad. Horus was the falcon god, sky-born and radiant. In myth, he battled Set to avenge his father Osiris and to claim the throne of Egypt. His victory represented the triumph of order over chaos. Every pharaoh was seen as Horus on earth, wearing the falcon's crown, embodying divine kingship. Pause here. Picture a temple wall painted with these gods. Ra sails across the sky in his solar boat. Osiris lies in the underworld, his body wrapped in white linen. Isis kneels beside him, her wings spread wide, protective and tender. Horus soars above as a falcon, his eyes bright as the sun. These are not just images. To the Egyptians, they were truths, eternal and divine. And if you are still here, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys bring you calm and help you drift toward rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we'll walk further into the past together, softly and slowly, letting history unfold in the background. Now, let us return to the gods. Beyond Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Horus, there were countless others. There was Hathor, goddess of joy, music, and love, often shown as a cow or as a woman with cow's horns and a sun disk. She welcomed the dead into the afterlife with open arms, offering them food and drink. She was also the goddess of motherhood, beloved by women in childbirth and families in need of protection. There was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. Scribes prayed to Thoth for guidance, for it was he who had given hieroglyphs to humanity. He was also the god of the moon, balancing Ra's blazing sun with his gentle silver light. There was Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and the dead. Priests dressed as Anubis during funerary rituals, guiding the souls of the departed through the first steps of their journey. With black fur, the color of fertile soil, he symbolized rebirth as well as death. There was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and destruction, fierce and powerful. Yet she was also a protector, guarding the pharaoh and smiting his enemies. When her rage cooled, she could become Bastet, the gentle cat goddess of home, fertility, and joy. And there was Ptah, the craftsman god of Memphis, believed to have created the world through thought and speech. For the builders, the artisans, and the stonecutters, Ptah was patron and protector. Each god had temples, rituals, and priests. Offerings of bread, beer, wine, meat, and incense were given daily. Priests bathed statues of the gods, dressed them in fine linen, and presented food as if the deities themselves were dining. Festivals filled the streets with music, dancing, and joy, as sacred boats carrying statues of the gods were paraded along the river. For ordinary Egyptians, these gods were not distant figures. They were present in every moment of life. A farmer prayed to Hapi, spirit of the Nile, for a good flood. A mother prayed to Tauret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, for protection. A craftsman whispered thanks to Ta before carving stone. A family lit lamps to Isis, asking for her blessing over their home. The pantheon was vast, shifting, alive. To the Egyptians, this was not confusion but richness. The world was too full of wonder for only one god. Religion also shaped morality. The concept of Ma'at, truth, balance, order, was embodied in a goddess who wore an ostrich feather in her hair. At death, Egyptians believed the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by a monster. If it was light and pure, the soul passed on to eternal life. Thus, to live in harmony with the gods was to live a good life, honest, balanced, respectful of the divine order. Religion was not only ritual, it was ethics, guiding Egyptians in their daily choices. Now, as you breathe slowly, imagine yourself standing in a temple at dawn. The air is cool, filled with the scent of burning incense. Priests chant softly, their voices echoing against painted walls. A statue of Ra gleams in the rising light, gold catching the sun. You bow your head, feeling the presence of gods all around you, Ra above, Osiris below, Isis beside you, Horus soaring overhead. The world is alive, filled with spirit, balanced and eternal. This is the heart of Egyptian religion, not one god, but many, each carrying a piece of the universe, each reminding humanity of its place in the eternal order. For the Egyptians, the temple was not simply a place of worship. It was the house of the god. Within its walls lived the divine presence, embodied in a statue, nourished and cared for as if the god itself were a royal guest. Temples were built with care, aligned to the stars, the sun, or the river. Their walls were thick, their courtyards wide, their columns carved with images of gods and kings. The farther one moved inside, the more sacred the space became, until at last one reached the sanctuary, where the god's statue stood. Few were allowed in this holy place, only the high priests and the pharaoh himself. To the Egyptians, the temple was not where people gathered for prayer in the way we might think of churches or mosques today. Ordinary citizens rarely entered its deepest chambers. Instead, they worshipped outside, bringing offerings to the gates or joining in festivals when the god was carried in procession. Inside, the priests performed rituals on behalf of the people and the king, ensuring that the gods remained satisfied and the world stayed in balance. Priests were the guardians of this sacred duty. They did not serve full-time, many rotated in and out of priestly service, spending part of the year in temples and the rest in other roles. But when they were on duty, their lives were highly regulated. Each morning before dawn, priests purified themselves. They bathed in sacred pools, shaved their bodies to remove all hair, and donned fresh linen garments. Cleanliness was essential, for they were about to stand before the gods themselves. The day's ritual began with the awakening of the god. The high priest entered the sanctuary, opened the doors of the shrine, and greeted the statue within. The god was awakened with hymns and prayers, washed in cool water, anointed with oils, dressed in fine linen, and presented with food and drink. Bread, beer, meat, vegetables, and incense were placed before the statue, just as they would be for a living king. Once the offerings were complete, the food was removed and distributed among the priests. The gods were thought to consume the essence of the offerings, leaving the physical food to sustain their servants. This daily ritual was repeated every morning, without fail. To neglect it would be to risk the gods' anger, to disrupt Ma'at, the balance of the universe. Pause with me here. Picture the sanctuary of a temple. It is small, dark, quiet. The air smells of incense and oil. In the flickering lamplight, a priest approaches a statue of the god, carved from wood, stone, or gold. He bows low, whispers words of reverence, and carefully places fresh linen over the statue's shoulders. He lays bread at its feet, pours beer into a vessel, and lights incense. The smoke curls upward, carrying prayers into the unseen. This is Egypt's daily heartbeat, the gods fed, clothed, honored. And if you are still with me, awake and listening, let me pause to remind you gently, this is Background Historian. If these quiet journeys through history bring you calm, if they carry you toward sleep with a sense of peace, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we'll return together, softly and slowly, letting the past unfold in the background of your rest. Now, let us return to the priests of Egypt. There were many kinds of priests, each with a role. High priests oversaw the temples, often appointed directly by the pharaoh. They ensured rituals were carried out correctly and that festivals were organized. Wab priests were the purified ones, responsible for handling sacred objects and performing rituals after bathing. Lector priests recited spells and hymns from sacred texts, their voices carrying the power of words into the air. Some priests specialized in medicine, combining practical healing with incantations to the gods. Others studied the stars, watching the heavens for signs, aligning temples with celestial events, and guiding agriculture through their observations. Even musicians and dancers could be considered temple servants, for music and movement were essential in festivals. The beating of drums, the plucking of harps, the graceful steps of dancers, all were offerings to the gods. Temples were not only religious centers. They were also economic hubs. Vast lands were owned by temples, farmed by peasants whose produce fed the priests and funded rituals. Workshops within temple walls produced statues, jewelry, and offerings. Scribes recorded every item, ensuring the wealth of the gods was carefully managed. In this way, temples became powerful institutions, shaping not only religion but also politics and economics. Some temples grew so wealthy and influential that their priests rivaled the authority of the pharaoh himself. Yet always, in theory, the temple existed to serve the gods and maintain Ma'at. Festivals brought the gods out from their sanctuaries and into the streets. On these days, ordinary Egyptians could see their gods carried in sacred boats, adorned with gold, feathers, and flowers. Priests bore the statues on their shoulders, chanting hymns as they moved. Crowds lined the streets, cheering, singing, offering food and drink. One of the most famous festivals was the Opet festival in Thebes, where the god Ammonius' statue was carried from his temple at Karnak to the temple of Luxor. The journey symbolized renewal and fertility, the god's presence blessing the land and its people. In such festivals, religion became a shared joy, not confined to temple walls but alive in the streets, the river, and the hearts of the people. Now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself at a temple festival. The sun is bright, banners flutter in the wind, the smell of roasted meat and incense fills the air. Priests chant, musicians play, dancers whirl in colorful skirts. And at the center, carried high on golden poles, is the statue of the god, veiled but radiant. The crowd cheers, raising their hands, voices rising like the flood of the Nile. For this moment, the divine walks among them. Priests themselves lived between worlds, neither entirely ordinary nor entirely divine. Their duties bound them to rituals, yet many were also fathers, husbands, and members of their communities. They might serve the temple for a month, then return home to farm or trade, before rotating back to sacred duty. This blending of the sacred and the ordinary was a hallmark of Egyptian religion. The gods were not distant, they were woven into daily life. To serve them was to live with discipline, but also with connection to the very heartbeat of the cosmos. The temples themselves grew larger and more elaborate over time. Early temples were modest, built of mud brick. But by the New Kingdom, vast stone temples rose at Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel. Columns soared like forests, walls stretched for hundreds of feet, and pylons towered above the Nile. Yet the essence remained the same, to honor the gods, to feed them, to keep Ma'at intact. Even the smallest shrine echoed this pattern. A sacred space, offerings of food and incense, the quiet devotion of priests. Whether in Memphis or Thebes, in a grand temple or a humble chapel, the gods were present. Now, as you lie back and drift toward rest, imagine yourself walking through a temple at night. The moonlight spills across the courtyard, the stone walls glowing faintly. The air smells of incense long burned out. The sanctuary is quiet, the statue of the god resting in silence. Outside, the Nile flows steadily, reflecting the stars. You breathe deeply, feeling the stillness, the balance, the eternal presence of the divine. This is Egypt's temple world, a rhythm of daily rituals, priests in linen robes, and gods tended like kings. It is the heartbeat of their civilization, steady as the river, eternal as the stars. The day began with the rising sun. In Egyptian thought, Ra himself was reborn each morning, sailing his solar boat across the sky. To wake with the sun was to wake with life renewed. In the countryside, farmers stirred before dawn. Their mud brick houses were simple, small rooms with flat roofs, built of the Nile's clay baked hard in the sun. Inside, families slept on reed mats, wrapped in linen sheets. The air was cool, the faint smell of smoke from last night's fire still lingering. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes, women prepared bread dough from barley or emmer wheat, and men gathered tools for the fields. A pot of beer, thick, nutritious, and mildly fermented, might be shared before work began. For most Egyptians, farming was life. The Nile's annual flood was the great calendar. When the waters rose, they brought rich black silt, renewing the fields. When the waters receded, the land was fertile, ready for planting. Farmers guided wooden plows pulled by oxen, breaking the earth for wheat and barley. Others planted flax for linen, or vegetables like onions, garlic, and leeks. Dates and figs grew in orchards, while papyrus was harvested along the riverbanks. Fishing was also common. Men cast nets from small boats, speared fish in the shallows, or trapped them in woven baskets. The Nile was alive with bounty, perch, catfish, and eels. In the marshes, hunters caught ducks and geese, sometimes using trained cats to flush them from reeds. The day's labor was long and hot, but it was guided by rhythm, by songs, by the rising and setting of the sun, by the eternal flow of the Nile. Craftsmen filled Egypt's towns and cities. Stonecutters shaped blocks for temples and tombs, hammering steadily, their chisels ringing against limestone. Carpenters worked with imported cedar and local sycamore, building furniture, boats, and statues. Metalworkers hammered copper into tools and ornaments, while potters turned clay into jars, bowls, and lamps. In workshops, apprentices learned from masters, passing down techniques through generations. The smell of wood shavings, the sound of hammers, the glow of kilns, these were the marks of Egypt's bustling craft economy. Artisans also worked for the tombs of nobles and kings. They painted walls with scenes of daily life, farmers harvesting, fishermen casting nets, women grinding grain, images meant to provide the dead with all they needed in eternity. Scribes were a special class. In a world where most could not read or write, scribes held great power. Trained from youth, they learned hundreds of hieroglyphs, practiced on shards of pottery or flakes of limestone, and memorized texts of law, ritual, and story. A scribe sat cross-legged with a wooden palette, brushes made of reeds, and ink of black and red. He recorded harvests, wrote letters, kept temple accounts, and copied sacred texts. To be a scribe was to be closer to the gods, for writing itself was seen as a divine gift from Thoth, the god of wisdom. Parents dreamed of sending their sons to scribal school, for it was a path to power and comfort. A farmer's back bent under the sun, but a scribe's hand wrote in the shade. Pause with me here. Imagine walking through a village in the Old Kingdom. The sun is high, fields stretch green along the river, and the air hums with life. Farmers guide oxen, children chase each other along dusty paths, women grind grain with heavy stones, filling the air with the sound of stone against stone. Craftsmen hammer, scribes write, priests chant in distant temples. This is Egypt not of kings, but of people, millions of lives, lived day by day. And if you're still with me, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these quiet journeys into the past bring you peace as you drift into rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we walk softly into history together, letting stories carry us towards sleep. Now, let's return to our Egyptian day. Meals were simple but nourishing. Bread and beer formed the staples, with onions, beans, and fish as common accompaniments. Wealthier families enjoyed meat, goose, duck, or beef, and honey, fruit, and wine. In the cool of evening, families gathered outside their houses. Children played games with knucklebones or spinning tops. Women spun flax into thread, wove linen on looms, or prepared food for the next day. Men mended tools, carved small statues for household shrines, or told stories of gods and pharaohs. Music filled the air. Flutes, harps, drums, and rattles were played, while voices rose in song. Dance was common, at festivals, but also at home. For the Egyptians, joy was not separate from life, it was woven into it. Religion was present even in the humblest house. Many families kept small shrines, with figures of protective gods. Tauret, the hippo goddess, guarded mothers and children. Bes, the dwarf god, with his fierce face and lion's mane, drove away evil. Offerings of bread, beer, or incense were placed before these figures, asking for safety and health. Life was fragile. Illness, accidents, and misfortune were always near. But the Egyptians lived with resilience, trusting in the gods, in family, and in the eternal rhythm of the Nile. Now, imagine yourself lying on the flat roof of a mud brick house at night. The air is cool, the stars bright above the desert. Around you, the village has grown quiet. A dog barks in the distance, a donkey brays, then silence again. You breathe deeply, smelling the faint scent of bread baking for tomorrow. Above you, the Milky Way stretches across the sky, the great river of stars mirroring the Nile below. For the Egyptians, this was eternity, not just pyramids or temples, but the simple rhythm of life, lived in harmony with earth and sky. This is daily life in the Old Kingdom. Fields of wheat, fishermen on the Nile, craftsmen in workshops, scribes at their palettes, families gathered under starlight. Not kings or generals, but ordinary people, whose work and joy built the foundation of one of history's greatest civilizations. Writing in Egypt was seen as a gift of the gods. According to myth, it was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and the moon, who invented writing. He offered humanity a way to capture words, preserve memory, and communicate with the divine. To write was not merely practical. It was sacred. The script of Egypt was hieroglyphic, meaning sacred carvings. These signs were intricate, each one representing a sound, an idea, or a whole word. Some were pictures of familiar things, a bird, a snake, a loaf of bread. Others were abstract marks, shapes that hinted at meanings. Together, they formed a system both beautiful and complex, one that scribes spent years mastering. Hieroglyphs could be read left to right or right to left, depending on the direction the signs faced. They could run in neat rows or graceful columns. They could be carved into stone, painted on plaster, or inked onto papyrus scrolls. Always, they carried the power of permanence. To inscribe a name in hieroglyphs was to preserve it for eternity. Scribes were the guardians of this sacred skill. From childhood, they learned hundreds of signs, practiced endlessly, and memorized texts. They used palettes with two colors of ink, black for the main text, red for headings and important words. Their brushes were made from reeds, cut to a fine point. On shards of limestone, on scraps of pottery, and on sheets of papyrus, they trained their hands until the signs flowed as naturally as speech. To be a scribe was to stand apart. Most Egyptians could not read or write, but scribes could capture laws, record harvests, copy hymns, and preserve stories. They were historians, accountants, priests, and storytellers all at once. Their words gave structure to the state and immortality to the dead. Pause with me. Imagine watching a scribe at work. He sits cross-legged on a mat, palette at his side, a strip of papyrus stretched before him. He dips his reed brush into ink, then draws a falcon, a loaf of bread, a circle, a line. Slowly, patiently, words emerge, an offering prayer, a hymn to Ra, a record of grain delivered to a temple. Each stroke is deliberate, each sign a whisper to eternity. And if you're still with me, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these quiet stories help you rest, if they bring you peace at night, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we'll return together, softly and slowly, wandering into the past as you drift towards sleep. Now, let's return to Egypt's art. Egyptian art was not about realism in the way we think of it today. It was about meaning. Artists followed strict conventions, a visual language designed to communicate truths. Figures were drawn with heads and legs in profile, but eyes and torsos facing forward. This was not clumsiness, but clarity, the most recognizable parts shown together, ensuring nothing was hidden. Sizes conveyed importance. Pharaohs towered over commoners, gods loomed above humans, servants appeared small beside their masters. Colors carried symbolism. Green represented life and rebirth, like the fertile Nile. Red could mean power or danger, the heat of the desert. Gold symbolized the eternal, the flesh of the gods. Blue evoked the heavens and the Nile's life-giving water. Scenes were carefully arranged, not to show a moment frozen in time, but to capture eternal truths. A wall painting of a man fishing was not just a memory, it was a guarantee he would fish forever in the afterlife. A woman grinding grain was not just an image, it was provision for her soul, bread eternal. Tomb walls were filled with such scenes. Farmers harvesting, cattle driven to pasture, banquets of food and music, boats sailing the Nile. These were the joys of earthly life, carried into eternity through art. Alongside them, hieroglyphs recorded prayers, may offerings of bread and beer, oxen and fowl, linen and alabaster, be given for all eternity. Temples, too, were covered in images. Pharaohs carved in colossal size offered incense to the gods, struck down enemies, or received crowns from Horus and Hathor. These carvings were not simply for decoration. They proclaimed the pharaoh's role as mediator between gods and men, reinforcing the divine order. Statues also carried meaning. A pharaoh's statue showed him eternally young, strong, and still. Expressions were calm, bodies idealized. The goal was not to capture a moment but to embody perfection. In temples, statues of gods rested in sanctuaries, hidden from the public, tended daily by priests. To the Egyptians, these statues were not mere stone, they were living vessels for divine presence. Art was also portable. Amulets shaped like ankhs, symbols of life, scarabs, beetles representing rebirth, and eyes of Horus, symbols of protection, were worn by Egyptians of every class. Jewelry of gold, faience, and semi-precious stones carried beauty and magic alike. Papyrus scrolls held texts of wisdom, prayers, and spells. Most famous among them was the Book of the Dead, a collection of writings placed in tombs to guide souls through the underworld. Painted with spells and vignettes, it showed the deceased before Osiris, their heart weighed against the feather of Maat, hoping to pass into eternal life. Now, take a deep breath. Picture yourself inside a noble's tomb at Saqqara or Giza. The chamber is cool, the air faintly dusty. Oil lamps flicker, casting light over painted walls. You see farmers harvesting grain, fishermen casting nets, servants carrying baskets of fruit. Hieroglyphs run beside them, elegant and precise, whispering prayers for eternity. You close your eyes, hearing the rustle of papyrus, the scratch of a reed pen, the quiet murmur of a scribe at work. You are surrounded by art and writing, not as decoration, but as magic, symbols that carry life into forever. This is the essence of Egyptian art and writing. Hieroglyphs captured words, statues embodied presence, paintings guaranteed joy. Everything created carried meaning, linking the living to the dead, the human to the divine, the moment to eternity. For the Egyptians, art was not simply beauty. It was function. It was survival beyond death. It was life carved, painted, and written into forever. The Egyptians were skilled observers of the human body. Their knowledge came from centuries of practical experience, treating injuries from farming, hunting, and construction, easing childbirth, and caring for the sick. One of the greatest sources of their medical knowledge was the Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BCE but based on much older texts. This scroll contains descriptions of injuries and treatments, showing how Egyptians diagnosed wounds, fractures, and dislocations. It reveals a strikingly rational approach, examining the patient, observing symptoms, and offering practical remedies. For example, the papyrus describes setting broken bones with splints of wood, treating wounds with honey and grease, and applying meat to stop bleeding. It distinguishes between cases a physician could treat, those that might be managed, and those that were hopeless. This was medicine rooted in observation, not superstition. But alongside practical remedies stood magic. For Egyptians, illness was often seen as the work of malevolent spirits, curses, or angry gods. To heal the body, one also had to heal the soul. Thus, a physician might prescribe both a poultice of herbs and an incantation whispered over the patient. Magic was not separate from medicine, it was part of it. A spell could protect against snake bites, scorpion stings, or the evil eye. Amulets of the Eye of Horus were worn for health, while figurines of Bes or Tauret were placed in homes to guard mothers and children. The Ebers Papyrus, another great medical text, is filled with remedies that blend the two worlds. It describes hundreds of treatments using plants, minerals, and animal products, garlic for the heart, honey for wounds, willow for pain, mixed with prayers and ritual actions. To speak the right words was as important as applying the right herb. Pause with me. Picture a healer at work in ancient Egypt. He sits cross-legged, grinding herbs with a pestle in a small stone bowl. The scent of garlic, honey, and resin fills the air. Beside him lies a strip of papyrus, covered in neat hieroglyphs. He takes a reed brush, dips it in ink, and reads aloud a spell to drive away illness. Then, gently, he applies the paste to a wound, ties it with linen, and places an amulet around the patient's neck. Healing, for him, is both touch and word, herb and prayer. And if you're still here, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these quiet journeys bring you calm, if they ease you into rest as you drift towards sleep, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we walk softly into the past, letting history unfold in the background of your dreams. Now, let us return to Egypt's healing world. Egyptian physicians were respected throughout the ancient world. Greek writers later marveled at their skill, noting that some doctors specialized, one for the eyes, another for the stomach, another for bones. Their reputation spread as far as Mesopotamia and even Persia, where pharaohs sometimes sent physicians to foreign courts. Dentistry, too, was practiced. Though tooth decay was common due to coarse bread filled with grit from grinding stones, Egyptians developed tools to extract teeth and relieve pain. They used mixtures of herbs and resins to soothe aching gums. Women received special care in childbirth. Midwives and female healers guided labor, aided by amulets of Tauret and Bes. Spells were recited for safe delivery, while practical measures, oils, massages, positions, were used to ease birth. Despite risks, childbirth was seen as sacred, overseen by protective deities. Magic also served as prevention. Amulets were worn against disease, snakes, and bad fortune. Words of power were inscribed on papyrus, rolled up, and tied around the neck. Statues of protective gods were placed in homes, ensuring no spirit could harm those inside. Dreams, too, were seen as signs of health or illness. Dream books listed interpretations. To dream of eating crocodile meat was good, to dream of a falling star was bad. A healer might use these omens to diagnose unseen troubles. Medicine and magic were never far apart. To heal fully was to treat body, soul, and spirit alike. The materials of healing were drawn from the natural world. From plants, garlic, onions, juniper berries, castor oil, willow bark, coriander, and mandrake. From minerals, natron, malachite, ochre, and salt. From animals, honey, milk, goose fat, and even powdered parts of crocodiles or lizards. Honey was a favorite, it soothed wounds and prevented infection. Willow bark, containing a compound like aspirin, relieved pain. Natron dried and disinfected. These remedies, tested by centuries of use, often worked. Combined with ritual, they became powerful. To crush garlic while reciting an incantation was to call both plant and god to aid. To bandage a wound with honey while wearing an amulet was to layer protection upon protection. Now, take a slow breath. Imagine walking into a healer's house in Thebes. Shelves line the walls, filled with jars of herbs, oils, and powders. Strips of papyrus lie rolled in baskets, filled with spells and recipes. A statue of Thoth, god of wisdom, sits in the corner, watching with calm eyes. A patient lies on a mat, a wound wrapped in linen, a protective amulet resting on their chest. The healer moves quietly, mixing a new remedy, whispering words of power. The air is calm, thick with the scent of resin and honey. You feel the blend of science and spirit, medicine and magic. This is Egypt's healing world. A place where observation met incantation, where herbs met prayers, where the body and soul were never separated. It was practical and mystical, scientific and spiritual. And for the Egyptians, it was whole. To the Egyptians, the soul was complex. It was not a single spirit, but many parts woven together. There was the Ka, the vital essence, the life force that needed food and drink even after death. Offerings of bread, beer, and meat were made at tombs so the Ka would never hunger. There was the Ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head. The Ba was the personality, the part that could fly freely, leaving the tomb by day to visit the living world and returning by night to rest. There was the Ak, the transformed, immortal self, achieved only after passing the trials of the underworld. To become an Ak was to live forever among the gods. And there was the Ren, the name. To erase someone's name was to erase their existence. To inscribe it was to make it eternal. Together, these pieces made up the human soul. Death was the beginning of their journey. The journey began with burial. The body was mummified, wrapped carefully in linen, preserved with oils, resins, and natron. Amulets were placed among the wrappings, scarabs, ankhs, eyes of Horus, each with protective power. A mask of painted wood or gold covered the face, ensuring the spirit could recognize itself. The tomb was stocked with goods, food, drink, clothing, tools, furniture, even models of servants. Painted scenes on the walls showed fields, rivers, banquets, and hunts. These were not decoration, but provisions. The dead would need them in the afterlife, and the images themselves carried magic, ensuring the soul could live richly forever. Priests performed rituals, opening the mouth of the mummy with special tools, so the deceased could breathe, eat, and speak again. The tomb was sealed, and the journey began. The soul first entered the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This was a realm both feared and revered, a landscape of rivers, mountains, caverns, and gates, guarded by fearsome beings. Serpents with flaming eyes, crocodile-headed demons, and monstrous guardians blocked the way. But the soul was not helpless. It carried the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers inscribed on papyrus and placed in the tomb. Each spell was a key, each prayer a shield. I know the names of the gatekeepers, the soul declared. I know the words to pass safely. Guided by these spells, the soul moved through the Duat, facing challenges, crossing rivers on boats, avoiding pitfalls, and appeasing gods with the right words. At last, the soul reached the Hall of Judgment. Here sat Osiris, Lord of the Dead, wrapped in white linen, his green face calm and eternal. Around him stood 42 judges, each a divine presence, each listening closely. At the center of the hall stood a great scale. On one side lay the heart of the deceased, seat of memory, conscience, and truth. On the other side lay the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order. The heart was weighed against the feather. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would tip the scale downward. Waiting beside the scale was a terrifying figure, Ammit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. If the heart failed, Ammit would swallow it, and the soul would cease to exist, erased forever. But if the heart was light, balanced with Ma'at, the soul was declared pure. Thoth, god of writing, recorded the verdict. Osiris welcomed the soul, granting it passage into eternity. Pause with me. Picture this hall in your mind. Torches burn with steady light, casting long shadows across towering columns. Osiris sits on his throne, calm and eternal, his crook and flail across his chest. Before him stands the soul, trembling yet hopeful. The scale creaks as the heart is weighed against the feather. Time stretches. Silence fills the air. And then, at last, the scale balances. The soul is judged worthy. Relief floods the chamber. Eternity awaits. And if you are still here, listening softly, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these nightly stories carry you calmly into rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we travel further into the past together, letting history unfold slowly in the background of your dreams. Now, let us continue the journey. Passing judgment, the soul entered the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. Here, the landscape mirrored the Nile Valley but perfected. Fields stretched endlessly, always fertile, never failing. The river flowed gently, lined with reeds and lotus blossoms. The air was cool, the sky always bright, free of storm or drought. In the field of reeds, souls lived as they had in life, but without hardship. Farmers plowed golden fields, fishermen cast nets into clear waters, families gathered for eternal banquets. Loved ones reunited, music and laughter filled the air, and the gods themselves walked among the blessed. Pharaohs ruled again, but without tyranny. Nobles feasted, but without greed. The poor rested, free from toil. All was balanced, all was harmonious. This was Egypt's dream of eternity, life perfected. The journey of the soul was not only about paradise. It was also about transformation. To pass through the Duat, to stand before Osiris, to enter the field of reeds, this was to become an Ak, a shining spirit, eternal and divine. The Ak could join the sun god Ra, sailing across the sky in his boat, or dwell peacefully with Osiris in the underworld. The soul could also return to the world of the living, visiting tombs, receiving offerings from descendants, watching over family and village. The dead were not gone, they were present, woven into the rhythm of daily life. Now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself walking along the banks of the field of reeds. The air is cool, the river calm. Birds sing softly among the reeds, their wings flashing with color. Farmers guide oxen through golden fields, smiling as they work, never weary. Families sit beneath date palms, sharing bread and figs. In the distance, Osiris watches, his throne shining. You feel peace, balance, eternity. The journey is complete. This is the Egyptian afterlife. A path of trials, of spells and guardians, of judgment and paradise. A vision of eternity shaped not by despair but by hope, that death was not the end, but the beginning of a new and perfect life. At the very top stood the pharaoh. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh was not merely a king. He was divine, the living Horus, son of Ra, keeper of Ma'at, the sacred balance of truth and order. His role was to ensure harmony between gods and humans, Nile and desert, life and death. The pharaoh wore crowns that symbolized his dominion, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the red crown of Lower Egypt, or sometimes both combined in the double crown, signifying the unity of the two lands. He carried the crook and flail, symbols of guidance and authority. Every pyramid, every temple, every military campaign was ultimately an extension of the pharaoh's will. To serve him was to serve Egypt itself. Beneath the pharaoh stood the nobility. Nobles were often members of the royal family or close advisors, rewarded with land and wealth. They governed provinces, oversaw tax collection, and commanded troops. Their tombs, carved in stone and painted with vivid scenes, show banquets, hunts, and servants bringing offerings. Nobles enjoyed luxury, homes with courtyards, gardens shaded by trees, fine linen garments, and jewelry of gold and lapis lazuli. Yet their role was not only pleasure. They were expected to maintain order in their districts, ensuring the pharaoh's commands were carried out and Ma'at upheld. Another powerful class was the priests. Priests were the keepers of temples, the ones who tended the gods each day. Their authority came not from wealth alone but from spiritual power. Temples owned vast tracts of land, and priests managed them, making temples not only religious centers but also economic hubs. High priests often rivaled nobles in influence, sometimes even challenging pharaohs. Yet their daily lives were devoted to ritual, bathing, shaving, donning linen, and performing sacred rites. In their hands rested the balance between humans and gods. Then came the scribes. Though fewer in number than farmers or craftsmen, scribes were essential. They recorded taxes, harvests, decrees, and temple accounts. They copied hymns, myths, and spells onto papyrus, preserving Egypt's culture. To be a scribe was to live with relative comfort. Their education began in youth, memorizing hieroglyphs, practicing endlessly on shards of limestone until their hands moved smoothly. Parents dreamed of sons becoming scribes, for the profession offered stability, respect, and a path upward in society. A scribe saying summed it up: a man's hand is his weapon. Better to write with a pen than toil with a hoe. Pause with me. Picture yourself standing in a busy Egyptian town. At the palace, nobles confer with officials. In the temple, priests chant to the gods. In a shaded courtyard, scribes bend over papyrus scrolls, their reed pens scratching softly. The air hums with order and purpose, each class fulfilling its role in the grand design of Ma'at. And if you're still awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these quiet journeys into the past bring calm to your nights, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we walk deeper into history together, softly and slowly, letting it settle in the background of your rest. Now, let's return to the people of Egypt. Beneath the scribes stood the craftsmen and artisans. These were the builders, painters, sculptors, and metal workers whose hands gave shape to Egypt's monuments. They carved statues of pharaohs, painted tomb walls with vivid scenes, hammered gold into jewelry, and cut stone for temples. Whole communities of craftsmen lived in places like Deir el-Medina, a village near the Valley of the Kings. Here, artisans worked on royal tombs, their lives preserved in records and graffiti that show both their skill and their humanity. They enjoyed decent wages, sometimes paid in bread and beer, and though not wealthy, they were respected for their craft. Then there were the soldiers. Egypt's army protected the land from invaders and guarded trade routes. Soldiers marched with spears, shields, and bows, their ranks disciplined and steady. Many came from farming families, serving during campaigns or border patrols. In return, they received land or payment. The army also built, digging canals, quarrying stone, and working on royal projects. Soldiers were not only warriors but also laborers in service to the state. Their discipline and loyalty reinforced Egypt's strength. At the broad base of society stood the farmers and laborers. They were the majority, the foundation of Egypt. Farmers tended the Nile's fertile fields, planting wheat, barley, and flax. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. During the inundation, when fields lay underwater, they worked on the pharaoh's building projects, hauling stone, digging canals, shaping mud brick. Life was not easy. Taxes claimed a share of their harvests, and labor demands were heavy. Yet farmers found rhythm in the seasons, joy in festivals, and strength in family. Without their work, pyramids could not rise, temples could not stand, and nobles could not feast. At the very edges of society were slaves and servants. Egypt did not rely on slavery as heavily as later civilizations, but captives of war were often forced into labor. Some worked in households as servants, others in quarries or on building sites. Their lives were hard, though evidence suggests many could integrate into Egyptian society over time. Household servants, whether enslaved or free, supported nobles and wealthy families, cooking, cleaning, grinding grain, fetching water. Their presence filled the background of elite life, invisible in records but vital in reality. Now, take a slow breath. Imagine walking through an Egyptian village at dusk. Farmers return from the fields, their baskets filled with grain. Craftsmen close their workshops, wiping dust from their hands. Soldiers relax by firelight, sharpening spears. Scribes roll up their papyrus scrolls, storing them safely in wooden chests. Priests finish evening offerings, their chants echoing faintly in the distance. Nobles retreat into grand houses, feasting with family. And above all, the pharaoh's palace glows, its torches burning against the night sky. Society is layered, but together it breathes as one. This was Egypt's social order, a pyramid of its own, from pharaoh at the top to farmers at the base. Each class had a role, each bound by duty, each contributing to the eternal rhythm of Ma'at. At the heart of Egypt's wealth was the Nile itself. Each year, the river flooded, covering the fields with rich black silt. Farmers planted wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables. These crops fed not only the villages but also the workers building pyramids, the priests tending temples, and the armies marching abroad. Surpluses of grain could be stored or traded, making the Nile a lifeline of prosperity. The river was also Egypt's highway. Boats made of papyrus or wooden planks sailed up and down, carrying goods and people. With the wind at their backs or oars in their hands, Egyptians moved stone, timber, and food more easily than by land. The Nile connected the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, into one thriving economy. Beyond farming, Egypt's land held many riches. From the quarries came limestone for temples, sandstone for statues, and granite for obelisks. From the deserts came copper, gold, and semi-precious stones. Gold especially was abundant in Nubia to the south, where pharaohs sent expeditions to mine the desert hills. Egypt's gold became legendary, filling temples with glittering offerings and coffins with radiant masks. Turquoise and lapis lazuli were treasured for jewelry. Lapis, imported from far-off Afghanistan, glowed a deep blue, symbolizing the heavens. Carnelian and jasper added rich reds and oranges, echoing the desert sun. These stones were carved into amulets, beads, and inlays for statues. Papyrus, harvested from the riverbanks, was another treasure. Pressed and dried into sheets, it became the world's first true paper, carrying hieroglyphs across time. Papyrus scrolls were exported across the Mediterranean, spreading Egyptian knowledge and culture. Pause for a moment. Imagine standing at a quarry near Aswan. The sun blazes overhead, workers chip at granite with copper tools, their hammers ringing against the stone. Dust rises, sweat glistens, and slowly a massive block is freed. Sledges creak as men drag it toward the river, where boats wait to carry it north. This granite will one day stand as a towering obelisk, gleaming in the temple of a god. Wealth is not only in gold, but in stone itself. And if you are still here with me, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these soft journeys bring you peace at night, I invite you to subscribe. Each evening we travel deeper into history together, quietly, slowly, letting it unfold in the background of your rest. Now, let's follow Egypt's trade beyond its borders. Egypt was not isolated. Its deserts and seas connected it to distant lands, and through trade, Egypt gained goods it could not produce on its own. To the south, in Nubia, Egypt found gold, ivory, ebony wood, and exotic animals. Caravans of donkeys crossed deserts carrying tusks of ivory, hides of leopards, and ostrich feathers. Nubia also supplied soldiers, skilled archers whose bows gave them great renown. Relations with Nubia shifted between trade, conquest, and alliance, but always Nubia was essential to Egypt's wealth. To the east, across the Sinai and into Canaan, Egypt traded for cedar wood from Lebanon, perfect for ships and coffins. Olive oil, wine, and silver also came from these lands. Egyptian pottery and papyrus flowed in return, exchanged along bustling caravan routes. Farther east still, from Mesopotamia, came luxury goods, lapis lazuli, fine textiles, and crafted ornaments. In return, Egypt sent gold, linen, and grain. To the west, across desert oases, caravans carried trade into Libya, exchanging grain for livestock, skins, and salt. To the north, across the Mediterranean, Egyptian goods reached Crete and the Aegean. There, Egypt's art and ideas mingled with the Minoans and later the Greeks. In return came olive oil, pottery, and crafted items that found their way into Egyptian homes. And to the mysterious land of Punt, somewhere along the Red Sea or the Horn of Africa, expeditions sailed to bring back incense, myrrh, frankincense, exotic woods, and monkeys. To the Egyptians, Punt was a land of wonder, a source of sacred scents for temple rituals. Trade was not only about wealth. It was about connection. Each foreign good carried stories of distant lands, gold from Nubia's deserts, cedar from Lebanon's mountains, incense from Punt's coasts. Through these networks, Egypt did not stand alone but shone as part of a web of ancient civilizations. Inside Egypt, wealth flowed through temples and palaces. Temples received vast offerings of food, land, and treasure, which priests redistributed. Palaces housed workshops where craftsmen shaped gold into jewelry, carved stone into statues, and sewed linen into garments. Scribes kept careful records, ensuring the pharaoh's treasuries overflowed with goods. Festivals displayed this wealth. Processions showed golden statues of gods, offerings piled high, priests in linen robes carrying sacred boats. To the people, these sights were dazzling, proof of divine favor and the pharaoh's power. Now, take a slow breath. Imagine walking through a market along the Nile. Stalls are filled with baskets of onions, garlic, and figs. Pottery jars hold beer and wine. Traders display jewelry of gold and carnelian, amulets shaped like scarabs, and rolls of papyrus. A merchant boasts of cedar wood from Lebanon, its scent sharp and sweet. Another shows off ivory combs, carved smooth and gleaming. Around you, voices rise, donkeys bray, children laugh, and the river flows steadily nearby. This is Egypt's wealth. Alive, bustling, endless. Egypt's prosperity was built on many pillars: the fertile Nile, the quarries and mines, the caravans and boats, the treasures of trade. Together they sustained the pharaoh's building projects, the priests' temples, the soldiers' campaigns, and the daily lives of millions. It was this wealth, steady and abundant, that allowed Egypt to endure for thousands of years, its monuments rising, its culture flowering, its legacy etched in stone and story. In the earliest days, Egypt's conflicts were small and local. Villages fought over land, water, and cattle. Weapons were simple: spears of wood tipped with flint, clubs carved from hard stone, and bows strung with sinew. Warfare was personal, fought hand to hand, neighbor against neighbor. But as Egypt unified and grew, so too did its armies. By the time of the Old Kingdom, pharaohs commanded organized forces, made up of conscripted farmers during the flood season, when fields lay underwater. These men carried spears, axes, and bows, trained under overseers, and marched in formations. The army was not only for war. Soldiers also worked on royal projects, digging canals, hauling stone, building temples. Their discipline and numbers gave the state both protection and labor. Egypt's geography offered natural defenses. The deserts to the east and west, the cataracts of the Nile to the south, and the Mediterranean to the north made invasion difficult. For centuries, Egypt lived in relative peace, secure behind its barriers. But as centuries passed, new threats arose. Invaders from Asia brought new weapons and tactics. From the desert came raiders seeking plunder. From Nubia to the south came rival kingdoms. Egypt had to adapt, to strengthen its armies, to march beyond its borders. Pause here. Picture an Egyptian soldier. He wears a simple linen kilt, his head shaved for coolness. In his hand is a spear tipped with copper, in his other a shield of wood and leather. A bow hangs across his shoulder, and a dagger rests at his belt. He marches with his comrades, dust rising from their feet, the sun blazing overhead. Together they are the pharaoh's army, defenders of the Nile. And if you are still awake with me, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these journeys bring calm to your evenings and help you drift into rest, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we walk softly into the past together, letting history unfold quietly as you fall asleep. Now, let us return to Egypt's warriors. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's armies grew more professional. Fortresses were built along the Nile, especially near Nubia, guarding trade routes and gold mines. These forts were strongholds of mud brick, with towers, walls, and storehouses. Soldiers stationed there watched the river, ready to repel invaders or raiders. But the greatest change came in the Second Intermediate Period, when Egypt faced the Hyksos. These invaders from Asia brought with them the horse and chariot, weapons of bronze, and new styles of warfare. The Egyptians, at first unprepared, were defeated and ruled by the Hyksos for more than a century. Yet from this defeat came transformation. The Egyptians learned from the Hyksos, adopting horses, chariots, and bronze weapons for themselves. By the New Kingdom, Egypt's army had become a force unlike any before. The New Kingdom was Egypt's age of empire. Pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep II, and Ramses II led campaigns far beyond the Nile Valley, into Canaan, Syria, and Nubia. Armies now marched with ranks of chariots, drawn by swift horses, carrying archers who rained arrows upon their foes. Infantry followed, armed with spears, axes, and curved swords called khopesh. Shields of leather-covered wood protected them, while bronze helmets gleamed under the sun. At the famous Battle of Kadesh in the 13th century BCE, Ramses II faced the Hittites in one of the largest chariot battles in history. Thousands of chariots clashed, dust rising, wheels rumbling, arrows flying. Though the battle ended in stalemate, it showed Egypt's military might, and it led to the world's first recorded peace treaty. War was not only about conquest. It was also about wealth. Victorious pharaohs returned with spoils, gold, cattle, captives, and tribute from conquered lands. Foreign princes bowed before Egypt, sending gifts of silver, incense, and exotic animals. Temples filled with treasure, palaces with luxury. But war also brought hardship. Soldiers marched far from home, fought in deserts and mountains, faced wounds and death. Families waited anxiously by the Nile, hoping for safe return. For all its glory, war was a heavy burden. Now, take a deep breath. Imagine standing on the plain at Kadesh. The sky is filled with dust, the ground shakes with the thunder of hoofs. Chariots sweep past, their riders loosing arrows. Soldiers clash with spears and shields, their shouts mingling with the rumble of wheels. In the chaos, the pharaoh himself drives his chariot, his bow stretched, his face set with determination. For Egypt, this is not only a battle, it is the defense of Ma'at, the struggle for balance in a world of chaos. Egypt's armies left more than victories. They left a legacy of walls and fortresses, of weapons and chariots, of treaties and conquests. They showed that Egypt, though often a land of peace and prosperity, could also be a land of war. And yet, even in its warfare, Egypt sought balance. Victory was celebrated, but peace was cherished. Pharaohs carved images of themselves smiting enemies, yet they also signed treaties, married foreign princesses, and built temples that honored not only gods but harmony. This was Egypt's army, born of farmers, shaped by necessity, transformed by foreign influence, and raised to glory in the New Kingdom. It defended the Nile, carried Egypt's banners abroad, and reminded the world that the pharaoh was both ruler and warrior. Family was the heart of Egyptian life. Most people lived in simple mud brick houses, with courtyards for cooking and rooftops for sleeping under the stars. Families were close-knit, often spanning generations under one roof: parents, children, grandparents, even cousins and in-laws. Marriage was not seen as a grand ritual but as a practical union, rooted in affection and mutual respect. Couples signed contracts, outlining property and rights. Husbands and wives worked together, he in the fields or workshops, she managing the household, grinding grain, weaving linen, and raising children. Yet Egyptian love was also tender and poetic. Love songs, preserved on papyrus, speak of longing glances, stolen kisses, and hearts that tremble. A young woman sings, "My heart flutters when I see you. It will not let me walk like a person. It lets me not put on my dress, nor wrap my shawl around me." These words, thousands of years old, still echo with warmth. Children were cherished. Boys and girls played with toys, balls made of leather, carved wooden animals, dolls with movable limbs. They learned by watching their parents, helping in fields or workshops, carrying water, or weaving baskets. Education was limited, but scribal schools trained boys in writing. Girls rarely became scribes, but they too held important roles in families and households. Mothers passed down skills, traditions, and wisdom. Childhood was not always easy, but it was filled with laughter and play. Pets were common companions. Cats were beloved for their grace and their ability to hunt mice and snakes. Dogs, monkeys, and even gazelles could be kept as household animals. Cats especially were sacred, linked to the goddess Bastet, and were treated with affection, often buried with their owners. Pause with me here. Imagine a small Egyptian courtyard at dusk. Children chase each other with wooden toys, their laughter echoing through the warm evening air. A mother hums softly while weaving linen on a loom, her hands moving rhythmically. A father repairs a fishing net, pausing to smile at his children's game. A cat stretches lazily in the shade, flicking its tail. Around them, the smell of baking bread drifts upward, mingling with the sound of distant flutes. And if you are still here with me, awake and listening, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these nightly journeys soothe you and bring calm to your evenings, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we return softly to the past, letting history drift in the background as you rest. Now, let's step deeper into Egypt's leisure and joy. Music was central to Egyptian life. Harps, flutes, lutes, and drums filled homes and festivals alike. Musicians played at banquets, in temples, and in fields. Songs praised gods, honored pharaohs, or expressed love. Dance accompanied music, with women twirling in graceful movements, arms swaying, skirts flaring. Professional dancers performed at festivals, but ordinary people too joined in, letting rhythm move their bodies. Poetry, too, was beloved. In addition to love songs, Egyptians wrote hymns to gods, praises of the Nile, and reflections on life and death. One poem says simply, "Follow your heart as long as you live. Put ointment on your head, dress in fine linen, anoint yourself with oils. Let your heart not weary. Follow your desire, and do not waste time." These words remind us that joy was not separate from Egyptian life, but essential to it. Leisure came in many forms. Board games were a favorite pastime. The game of Senet, played on a grid of squares, used pieces moved by throwing sticks or dice. Senet was more than amusement, it was linked to the afterlife, symbolizing the soul's journey through the duat. Winning was not only victory but safe passage. Another game, Mehen, featured a coiled snake as its board, with players moving along its body. Children played simpler games with knucklebones, marbles, and spinning tops. Festivals were the grandest leisure of all. Whole communities joined in, celebrating gods with music, food, and drink. Boats carried statues of gods down the Nile, while people feasted along the banks. Wine and beer flowed, laughter filled the air, and for a time, everyone, from noble to farmer, shared in joy. Now, take a slow breath. Imagine yourself at an Egyptian banquet. Torches flicker, casting warm light across painted walls. Guests recline on couches, sipping wine, eating figs and roasted duck. Musicians play harps, their strings shimmering, while dancers move gracefully before the crowd. Perfume drifts from bowls of lotus flowers, filling the air with sweetness. Laughter rises, mingled with music, joy thick and bright. This is Egypt at leisure, not in war or labor, but in celebration of life. Even religion carried joy. Festivals of Hathor and Bastet were filled with merriment, music, and dance. Processions for Ammonius or Ra brought entire cities alive with celebration. For the Egyptians, joy and worship were not separate. To honor the gods was also to delight in life. This was Egypt's gentler side, love sung in poems, families gathered in courtyards, children laughing at play, music and dance filling the evenings, games played by torchlight, and festivals uniting villages and cities in joy. Behind the monuments and hieroglyphs, behind the soldiers and priests, Egypt was also a land of laughter, tenderness, and leisure. Egypt's legacy begins with its monuments. The pyramids still rise against the desert sky, their shapes unmistakable. The Great Sphinx still gazes east, its face weathered but proud. Temples at Karnak and Luxor still stand, their columns vast, their walls covered in carved reliefs of gods and kings. Even after 4,000 years, these structures remain. They remind us of the ingenuity of Egypt's builders, the devotion of its workers, the vision of its rulers. they are more than stone. They are eternity, still whispering across time. Egypt's legacy also lives in its writing. For centuries, the hieroglyphs were silent, their meaning lost. Then, in the 19th century, scholars cracked the code using the Rosetta Stone, unlocking Egypt's voice again. Today we can read their prayers, their poems, their letters and stories. The words of scribes and priests, of love songs and hymns, live again. Through writing, Egypt speaks to us, not only of pharaohs and gods, but of ordinary people. We hear their hopes for harvests, their laughter at festivals, their longing in love. Their humanity shines through. Pause here. Imagine yourself standing before the Rosetta Stone. Its surface is dark, etched with 3 scripts, hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. For centuries, it was silent. Now, it speaks again, a bridge across time. Egypt's words, once forgotten, now flow once more. And if you are still here with me, listening softly, let me gently remind you, this is Background Historian. If these journeys have brought calm to your evenings, if they've helped you drift into rest with the past as your companion, I invite you to subscribe. Each night we step quietly into history together, letting it unfold in the background as you sleep. Now, let's return to Egypt's legacy. Egypt's legacy shaped later civilizations. The Greeks admired Egypt, learning from its medicine, mathematics, and architecture. Herodotus, the Greek historian, called Egypt the gift of the Nile. Greek gods blended with Egyptian ones, Zeus with Ammonius, Aphrodite with Hathor. The Romans too were fascinated. They brought obelisks to their cities, lined them in forums, and filled Rome with Egyptian symbols. Even after the fall of pharaohs, Egypt remained a land of wonder, a place of mystery and inspiration. Egypt's legacy continues in religion. Ideas of the soul's journey after death, of judgment before gods, of eternal paradise, these found echoes in later faiths. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at recalls later ideas of moral judgment. The eternal field of reeds echoes paradise in other traditions. Though Egypt's gods are no longer worshipped, their stories live on, their symbols still powerful. Egypt's legacy lives in art and imagination. Artists through the ages have painted pyramids and sphinxes, sculpted obelisks, and written novels and poems inspired by Egypt. Hollywood films, museum exhibits, and children's books all return to its imagery, golden masks, hieroglyphs, desert temples. Egypt is a source of mystery, of grandeur, of timeless beauty. Its art still inspires, its monuments still astonish, its culture still captivates. But Egypt's truest legacy may be its people. For behind the pyramids, behind the kings and gods, Egypt was built by millions of farmers, craftsmen, scribes, soldiers, mothers, fathers, and children. Their lives were simple yet profound, woven into the rhythm of the Nile. When we look at the painted scenes on tomb walls, of fishermen casting nets, of women grinding grain, of children playing, we glimpse not only their world, but ours. We see their humanity, their joys, their struggles, their love. Egypt's legacy is not only grandeur, it is the eternal heartbeat of ordinary life. Now, take a deep breath. Imagine the sun setting over the Nile. The river glows red and gold, boats drifting gently downstream. Farmers return from the fields, children laugh in courtyards, priests light lamps in temples, and the pyramids glow in the fading light. This scene could have been thousands of years ago, and yet it feels alive even now. Egypt endures, in stone, in story, in spirit. This is Egypt's legacy. Not only pyramids and pharaohs, but words and wisdom, faith and family, music and laughter. A civilization that lasted for millennia, whose echoes still reach us today. Thank you for joining me on this 20-part journey through ancient Egypt. From the first villages along the Nile, to the great pyramids and temples, to the joys of family life and the promise of eternity, we've walked softly together through one of history's greatest civilizations. If you've enjoyed this series, I invite you to subscribe to Background Historian. Each night we'll continue exploring new stories from the past, told gently and slowly, designed to calm your mind and carry you into sleep. Until then, rest well, and let history keep you company in your dreams.